Hello, everyone. Um, Today we're going to have another episode of Unfolding the Soul. Today, my guest is Skyler. I've met him on the Discord, where he's a passionate follower of this corner of the internet. And today he's going to be talking to us about intimacy, which is also one of the recently developing subjects on this corner of the internet. So, yeah, Skyler, what would you use as a definition for intimacy?
At its most basic level, it would be being close and having a contact with another. So being able to maintain what you are while being able to be close and connected with another. And then contact, not just like aware of.
So what would you say that the contact signifies? Like, what's the distinction between just being close and being close and in contact?
Well, being close, I went to school with like the same group of kids from kindergarten through most of high school and into college. It's about 90 of us. And we were all very close during that time because we had to spend literally our entire lives together. But I'm not in contact with like any of them. All of them pretty much went and did their own thing. All of us, some of them stayed in little groups. So that contact, I would say, is something more like genuinely when you're in contact with something, you stay what you are, but you actually do start to conform or map on. You see what's good in the other thing, it's worthwhile of it, and that's where you're able to conform or configure to it. And that means you're going to lose a little of what you are, but what you're trying to do is get rid of the worst parts of you or the things that aren't worth keeping of you. And when you're around others and you have a good contact with them, the word, I mean, I got that definitely from contact epistemology, which is like you need to have a touch point in where you know. You don't want your map in reality just to be like overlaying and be like, look, they match perfectly. You want your map in reality to actually like overlay so that you can,
Interpenetrate.
yeah, you want to be able to go in your map and kind of change it a little and then come back out and go into reality. You know, want to be able to move back and forth between them, I think. And so that's why I think contact matters.
So would you say that if you're not living in contact, but you are in the closeness, you're kind of living in an illusion?
Certainly. Yeah, there's people who live, that's like one of my favorite points in the little Vervaeke zombie book is them talking about, you know, a zombies in a crowd, but they're all alone. And that's a very common expression of people nowadays where they live with a roommate and they know nothing about their roommate except for like when they use the restroom and that they leave their dishes out. So basically, like we only see each other as human creatures, as a dog, more or less. Like this is what our pattern is, and that doesn't mean you have any actual contact or anything. You know, just living with someone doesn't mean you're actually in right relation or communion with them.
So what you're describing there is like a utilitarian, right? Like, how am I affected by this person? Like, what do I need to know
Yeah, I
about
think
this
that's kind of
person?
the layout of most of our. It's not the ideal. I'm definitely not a utilitarian, but I see that ethos, it's so rational, it's so logical that people have kind of slid into it, and that's why I don't know any of my neighbors. It's why it's hard for me to strike a conversation with my brother-in-law, and I live with him. We can, where you have great conversations. It's just there's an actual difficulty there, and I live with him. I'm helping raise his daughter, my niece, and yet him and I have to like put effort into talking to each other. Like we wouldn't naturally be friends, as you were kind of alluding to the other, or I've heard you allude to before more than once, where friendship isn't necessarily required. He's my brother-in-law. I really care about my niece. Him being a friend would actually be probably detrimental to me and him being brothers-in-law. We need to prioritize that connection, that relationship, that contact. But that means we lose other things. Him and I are not as close in other ways. So. But yeah, I
So
think the utilitarian aspect of it is very scary because I grew up where everybody was very name droppy because everybody was in these inner cliques. And if I used to work with someone or they used to work with someone, that's how they got up the ladder, was not just social reference, but that kind of pseudo connection, like pseudo contact. And
association.
yeah, just association. And that's all it is, instead of actually having any real, it's like I went to school at the same school as some famous guy. And it's like, what does that have to do with anything? But people do that because they want to feel that connection, that intimacy with this person that they actually have nothing to really relate to.
Well, sharing in the glory, right? Like it's a sense, sort of participation, but
Yeah,
not earned.
yeah, a pseudo participation is how I see it. And I think, I mean, especially it's just, I'm very against most every form of social media. I'm even on Discord very erratically. So it's just very disheartening when I see people so convinced that this is more real than the conversation they can have around a dinner table. And we really need to find a way to have people just meet and have dinners together and just do basic human things together, because that's where the magic happens. And that's where you actually get that contact, I think, is when you actually ask someone to pass the salt, or you see how they partition their food. You know, I watched a couple recently eat, and the man literally stirred everything we gave him, like the potatoes and the meat and the peas or whatever. He just stirred it together, kind of chopped up the meat and then just stirred it and ate it like that. And his wife literally like had everything partitioned so nothing touched, and was eating everything separately. Like she ate
That
all her
says a lot
peas,
about their
and I'm
relationship.
like, wow, here's two people, like they're married and they're that separate. So wow. And my wife and I are very, very different. So it's like, I get that. But then when we went and did our Myers-Briggs, her and I are both ENJP, which is like the rarest one. We were the only couple that made it through the whole section as a couple with the same of all 16 Myers-Briggs. And it's like, yeah, I get told that too. As completely opposite as my wife and I are, we have on the Myers-Briggs, we have the exact breakdown. So it's like kind of weird.
So the last thing I wanted to add is the closeness, right? So we've been dancing around closeness a little bit, right? But why do you think closeness is important for intimacy?
I have no idea why this thought popped in my head, so I'm going to give it a go. Bill Burr was talking about a comedian friend of his who passed, Patrice O'Neill. And he was trying to explain to the other, and you can just see Bill Burr get somber and says, you know, I still have talks with him. I still talk to Patrice. He's still part of my my movement. Another huge influence on me, Bill Burr's not a huge influence, but a very big influence on me would be Robert Anton Wilson. He has an interview very late in his life. I promise this will make sense to closeness. He has an interview very late in his life where his wife has passed. He's getting the third or fourth time is getting polio, so he can no longer walk. And in his dreams, his wife is dancing with him and stuff, and they're young, and they look around and all their friends are old. And then he wakes up and he's in an empty, you know, he's in a bed by himself. And then he explains to the reporter, like, I still have my wife with me. I can still talk with her. She'd been in my life for 40 something years, 50 something years. I knew her. However, I know it's her in my head and not me, because she does little things that I couldn't expect, which is what my wife did. As much as I knew my wife, she would still be this little quirk. That's how you know you're so close to someone, because if you've mapped them and you actually think you've mapped them, you're not close to them, because everybody's going to do these little quirks. And when you're actually close to someone, you really learn to appreciate those little spin-offs, those little quirks. Freaking Chad posting those random clips. He posted one with Jim Brewer, whatever the comedian guy on Glenn Beck. Very strange conversation. And it basically boiled down to him realizing just how helpful and how real some of those cheesy expressions are, and some of those those relationships you have, that closeness, that intimacy you have with someone. So closeness has a lot to do with time and space, which is about the most physical. But even when someone passes, you can still have closeness to them if you actually think about them every day. You can hear them in your head still. So closeness isn't locked to that, but it certainly has a lot to do with.
So in some sense, I hear you say that closeness is not a physical thing, but more like an internalization of the other.
Ooh, see, that would get to where it's hard for me to agree, but it's like words get so difficult there, because it's like when I did neurolinguistic programming, that's exactly what I thought. So my NLP part of my brain, that's how I map all of this. I think that I'm basically igniting the placebo effect in my head and creating a subroutine personality of this person so that I can keep them with me even though they're gone. That's what my meat monkey brain really wants to. But then that doesn't explain those weird surprises or the things that I can get told by people who aren't here anymore, who I know I'm close to, who I know
Well,
cared about me. So that's where it's like,
I don't know about that, because my
that's
brain
really weird to me.
sometimes tells me things and I'm like, what the fuck, brain? Like,
Well, yeah, I've done CBT most of my life, like since I was 11. So I know how to talk back to my terrible thoughts, but especially when I get motivation. I was around quite a lot. I'm 30 years old right now. I'll be 31 in October. And I was around a lot of World War II vets, considering I was born in 1991. Like, it's just my dad's a Vietnam vet, and a lot of the people I got to be around were late generation. A lot of Korean vets, Vietnam vets, World War II vets. There was a particular guy named Ray Kinsman, and he was a very strange fellow. Kinsman, he says, "I'm your brother," because he's your kin. That's his little one-liner. He was about 96 or 97 when he passed, in like 2020, right before COVID. And he was raised in an orphanage, lied about his age to get into the draft of World War II. He was in the first wave. He was in Italy, became a POW of fascist Italy, talked back to the guards and got his eye beaten. So he was blind in one eye. Goes all the way through the war. Instead of just being relieved at the POW camp when they get raided, he just eats and starts moving on with the army going north. Very hard guy. When he passed, he had 28 great grandkids, and none of his kids or his grandkids had been divorced. And like, he grew up in an orphanage. Like, and to see the tenacity of that man, he sold businesses. He was a huge donor to the nonprofit he helped start, basically. But he wouldn't let anybody know that he was donating. He just wanted to make sure that we didn't close. And to see the tenacity and the closeness, he's an old man, and he works out 3 days a week. He'd shake people's hands and just death grip them. So I'd let my friends meet him, and it's just fun because they think they're gonna like shake the hand of this rickety old man, and here he is, like Tonka death grip, really manly, trying to be machismo, and he's in his late 90s or mid 90s. It's just like, he's unbelievable. At my wedding, he was 94, 95. So like, very impressive fellow. And he would get so intimate with people. I watched so many people just break down in tears talking to him and his wife. He'd just lay things on. He'd recall something in his life that he hasn't told anybody in decades, probably, and he'd listen to what you're saying and go, "Oh, this is what you need to hear," and he'd just lay it on them. And it really opened me up to be more intimate, more just like, oh, when I have this weird thought, and it's probably too much for this person, but that's better than not enough. I think those are where I just see that dichotomy now, is you're stuck between too much or not enough. And I've decided to lean towards too much. And sometimes I can get all existential and scare people, but I try to be on like the more cheery side if it's going to be too much. But I really think that that's the dichotomy we're stuck in. And when you're with closeness, you want to have too much. It's like, it's how you know you're really close with someone. I can't get certain people out of my head, even though they're past. And then I have a teacher who like definitely left an imprint on me. And he's still in my head. I was only around him for 1 year in class for 1 hour a day. Like, technically he wasn't around me very much. I forgot all my other teachers' names pretty much. How come this guy is like seared into me? Like, well, he told me stuff I really didn't want to hear a lot, things like that. So I think closeness has, I mean, it's just, if I was going to put it down and like it's like where you meditate. You know, Andre from Australia, him and I really like talking about Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers has an amazing commencement speech where he kind of warms up everybody and then he asks them for a minute of silence. And then during that minute of silence, he wants you, I can't think about, if I start even doing the process, I get teared up. So I can like step away from it, describing it. He says, during this minute, I want everyone here to be silent. This is their graduation, right? They're all in there like capping down, blah, blah, blah. Here's Mr. Rogers telling you, I want everybody to sit perfectly silent for a minute. And just think about all the people who helped you get here, all the people who encouraged you, all the people who took something out of their day or out of their time to give you the opportunity to get here. And then just, you know, be grateful for them. And it's like, most people have genuinely never done that thought experiment because so much has happened to get most everyone right where we are. And that's why I believe you can have a level of closeness or intimacy. One of the more, what's it, a Protestant Bible guy I really like. I'm not going to name drop him right here, but I can mention it later. He has this quote that popped in when I found out he passed away during COVID. A quote popped in my head instantly, and it was like, being a Christian is being a member of the world's biggest organization because we don't lose members when they die. And when he said that, like, I mean, I've remembered that since I was a little kid. I was like 8 or 9 when my parents were watching his like series Unlocking the Secrets of the Bible. And man, I just think that's actually somehow real. I think if you're close to people, it's kind of like why I can agree with Vervaeke to a degree when he talks about reading Plato. You and I have discussed this before, how he can read a book and say he kind of knows that person. Spinoza would be a good example. Well, Spinoza's maybe a very small exception. One of the best writers alive, certainly one of the smartest people alive, lots of time on his hands, all the world's resources at his fingertips. So you can kind of inhabit his mind, but most people, you don't get to read inside their thoughts like that. Most people can't even organize their thoughts like at all, much less into tunes like Spinoza did. So
But we get to stand on their shoulders.
exactly, we're using their words and don't even know it. That's why I like to say that words are fossilized poems, and very often we're using words and don't actually know like what we're saying. So
Yeah. So I've thought a lot of, well, I don't know if I've thought a lot about it, but I've talked about it somewhere. Is awkwardness, right? Would you say awkwardness is too much of intimacy?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's an extreme because I can also think of examples of me being awkward because I was like trying to be cool, you know, like the kid who's trying to act like he doesn't care and then you know he really cares. See, that's awkward because that's playing on that movement still. And I really agree though. I mean, I think as soon as you start trying to extreme it, awkward is something you need to really, I think our culture has lost the ability to like be comfortable with awkwardness. So I run a soup kitchen and we feed like 15 to 45 people a night up in rural Arizona. And we have some very awkward people come through that just lack people skills. We had a lady who had been living out at one of the canyons right on the literal edge of town, like where the town limits are. She was living on that canyon so that she could be in town limits if she needed something. That's how her brain kind of, she had not spoken to anyone since October. And she came in early August. And like, she was awkward. She was awkward on a level that like made everybody stop and kind of like your conversation be interrupted because you'd hear her try to respond and your brain would go, what? And you just, she was so awkward. And then by the end, she was like back to being personable, like 2 hours of, she became a chatty Cathy and just couldn't stop. But I think awkward's a very good thing to pick up on, because if you see someone awkward, I think we need to learn how to help them. First episode of Mr. Rogers is the crazy lamp lady. She collects lampshades and wears them as hats and stuff. Mr. Rogers are friends with some awkward people, and he's trying to show you that's your neighborhood. You have a bunch of awkward people around you. And if you were honest about the things you did, probably some people would think you're pretty awkward too. So, I mean, I know for me, most people don't sit and read and write page after page after page of notes. It's just not how people normally operate. So,
Okay, well, when was intimacy for the first time a big deal in your life?
in that frame first. First, I guess I have two that I could map as very much like where it's like where I remember my consciousness turning on was this event. So I'll have to do a little bit of mapping, because when you're a kid, you don't know what's going on. But I was adopted by my biological grandparents. So I was living in my grandma and grandmother's house, who I refer to as my mom and dad. My big sister is my birth mother. That's very confusing for people, but hey, lots of people have been adopted by their grandparents. I'm glad I was, because of things. So I'm very confused. My dad, in general, is not a very intimate person. He's a professor, so he gets in front of a lecture, and that's what he does, like 6 to 8 hours a day, is huge classroom of people. But he's very good at one-on-ones. And we had a knock at the door, and I had to be under 5 years old. I know I was old enough to get the door, so I was probably 4-ish, 4 to 5 years old. And there's a very stern knock on the door, not like a neighborhood knock, not one of my friends' knocks, a really don't. I go open the front door, and there's a police officer there. And I'm just like, oh, hey, like I have no fear of cops, nothing. I'm just, oh, hey, what's going on? He goes, oh, hey, kid, do you know if your mom and dad's car's home? It's the Buick. And I was like, I like stopped and thought for a second. I'm like, I think it's in the garage, is what I was thinking. And then I just feel my dad's hand go boom on my head, which is a very normal thing I've seen, where men will kind of pat kids' heads. My dad had never patted my head before. That's just not his assign. We wrestle, we hike, we do all these things. We got fish, we do all these things, but I've never felt my dad like pat my head. But it looked normal, like looking back, looked very normal to the cop. You know, it's just a dad patting his kid's head, no big deal. And it just turned me off. My dad spoke, but I remember my dad lied to the cop. And I said, nope, car's not home. It's been missing for a week. My daughter's boyfriend stole it, we think. And I looked at my dad, and I'm like, my dad just lied to a cop. Like, what is going on? Firstly, my dad tells me to respect cops and stuff, all this stuff. Always tell the troops to cops. I've never heard my dad say, he's not a gangster, he's a professor. Here's my dad just flat out openly lying to a cop. And come to find out, my dad was telling kind of a half truth. My sister's boyfriend had stolen the car and done bad stuff with the car. And so the car was in the garage, and my dad didn't want the cop to know that. And it was me kind of like the first time realizing that my dad could lie or would lie. And like a whole lot, my whole cognition kind of turned on in that moment. And intimacy. And then the other one's really strange, but it happened within a week or two of that. I can't remember before or after because of being 4 years old. But downstairs, I have siblings that are 11, 15, and like 18 years older than me. So they were watching Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Have you ever? It's a very like 90s action movie. You know, they do a thing and there's like a punchline. Well, it's like R-rated, and I'm already cognition igniting very much. I walk down, and there's the scene at the end where the bad guy is fighting Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger kicks the bad guy, and the pipe hits him. Ugh! Pipe pops through him, and it's like a broken steam pipe. And Arnold Schwarzenegger says, "Let off some steam," and then walks away while the guy dies. I didn't understand what stunt doubles were, anything. I thought I just watched someone die, right? That's why kids should not watch movies without parents. So I thought I'd just watch someone get murdered. I walked outside, walked around to like the wood pile on the side of my house, and I just looked at one of the logs that was like spiky, just pointing right at me. And I thought, if my brother ran over here right now and like shoved me into that, I'd die. And it was like the first time in my life where I realized like this is all real. I felt intimate. I actually remember walking up and hugging our dog Nikki, and just like holding my dog. That's like where my memories end there. And very strange that you can hold on to those very specific. And it's like I don't remember the frame too much, but it's like genuinely thought I saw someone murdered. So when I watched Commando later, I'm like, this is the movie that messed me, like turned me on, like made me aware of death. Great. And yeah, the intimacy, that closeness, everybody around me is just like not performative, that's being harsh, but I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, so everybody really cared about how they looked and cared about,
Image,
yeah, just the facade on the outside. And
persona.
totally, I never clicked. So those are the two things in intimacy that like hit me when I was, you asked me, first times, because I remember thinking like, what were those two guys doing that they'd fight to the death? Because I didn't know it was a movie. I was watching the end of Commando with no framing as a little kid, watching it, and like a really, anyways, and like they were like talking while fighting, and they acted like they really knew each other and cared about each other, but they're trying to kill each other. And so like, anyways, those types of intimacy, and that's what I've seen more and more as I grow up. It's like I go to a church thing, and it's like if they're the same denomination, they get even more upset at each other. It just makes no sense. They're like more close on all these things, all these views, so the differences become even more substantial and more worth killing for. And that's
So do you
terrifying.
think that that weirdness of killing is because of closeness and lack of intimacy?
Yeah, I mean, basically, there's some desync between the contact and the closeness. When those aren't in alignment, repercussions are like apocalyptic. They will end worlds,
Right.
not figuratively. Yeah, lives, worlds, they'll end the way things are.
Because we can do a chemistry analogy, right? So if the centers are positively charged, right? Like if there's no bonds
Mm-hmm.
holding the two things together, like either you get fission or you get
Those are the two options. There's nothing else. And that's exactly it. That's a very good analogy. You know, those are the options. Um, and you can even change it. Like maybe if there's no bond and you're on Earth gravity under these conditions, you're going to get this. But if you're up in space and there's no mass within great distances, maybe they will just diffuse. And like, but that's not a risk worth taking, because um, people are very, they have a facade of intimacy. And I think that's where most of this, I think that's where, when you guys are talking very often, you and Mark have mentioned this word intimacy to me. When I think of it, I think of this like, it's like a performative contradiction. They really are not trying to perform. And by doing that, they are. It's like the guy who wants to come across manly. So he's acting like he doesn't care. And it just makes the person look extra weak. I don't know. There's no other way around it. You can't fake something like that. You can't fake intimacy, right? You can actually be intimate, and you can say, me and this person disagree very severely, but I know that this greater thing, we have a telos, we have a purpose that's greater than our little quabbles, that our quabbles will somehow move towards. And accelerating the contradictions, all that crap, that's what I see people falling into. They think that they can game that system now. They think that they're so smart, we're so intelligent, that I'll put us against each other's rivals, and we'll like figure out we'll synthesize what will happen. And sometimes there are perennial ways of seeing things that aren't supposed to be solved. Maybe the end of a conversation isn't supposed to have a point and have an answer. Maybe it gives you an answer that gives you 3 more questions. That's how you know you have correctly moved down the path, is the question has opened up the clearing. That's a quest that has given you more perspective. Whereas if your quest has lowered your perspective, it is probably a quest down instead of a quest up and up and beyond. So,
Interesting.
but contact and closeness, I didn't really map those, but now that you've been kind of pulling those out, I see that definitely is a because a contact is, there's a genuine touch, there's a genuine movement between one to the next. When you're spooning with your partner, you're in contact. It's
Well,
not
there's a
like
cooperation, right?
yeah. If you want to know more C's, exactly.
So
And
the way I look at it, it's like a cable, right? Like cables have these small copper wires that they're bound into a big,
oh yeah,
right?
coaxial. Yep.
And so and then these big strands, I see those as a dimension of intimacy, right? So you can have an intimate relationship with someone in one area, right? So you have that real tight bond, but if you make a presumption that that bond also exists in an area where you don't have those connections, where you just have like 2 copper wires running, because you mentioned it once, then you get that tension, right? So like I think there's even levels of intimacy within a person-to-person relationship because of, well, shared experience, right? Like
I think that really hits it. I'm not going to go political. I think it's so interesting to notice that like certain international calls and certain things that had been monthly meetings that world leaders all had to attend, those all got canceled during COVID. And escalations and all these weird tensions have moved. I find it very difficult for a lot of my calls. I have to do a lot of Zoom calls with people across the state or across the country. And when I have the Zoom call, I've been in a Zoom call with one lady like literally every month for a year and a half, right? Her and I have spoke a lot at this point. We're the only ones that are like super consistent. Her and I both have a lot of kind of relevant duties to the meeting. We finally got to meet in person, and just shaking her hand and then introducing her to my wife, and we all sat down. We like found a table where we could all meet. We're at a conference thing. We like found an open table. We all sat down. We ate lunch together. And it's like now I've gotten so much more done with that little like I had this closeness I had a monthly meeting with her. That's actually pretty, most of my meetings are quarterly or more specific, but a monthly meeting means there's like an active project every 2 weeks. And that builds up like a consistency of like a drum beat, but then there's like a whole new layer when you're asking them to pass the salt and all these really basic human things that make humanity real. And I've watched a lot of polarization be happening right now in politics, and like my state happens to be just like a humdrum for that. And basically my wife and I are the guests of honor at the Lincoln Day luncheon for the Republicans, and then guests of honor for the Democrat Party MLK Day thing. So it was like, and then I'm registered independent, so I like got up and let all of them know I can't even vote in primaries. So don't try and sell me on anything because I can't even participate in your system. And yet we felt close. Like all the people there, I started getting volunteers from both parties, all these things. They think they're so at odds and opposed, yet to me, if I could just get them to sit down and have dinner together, which I've had one of my senators and one of our congressmen, we actually all sat down there on 2 different sides of the aisle, sat down, and then they got 2 bills put through within like weeks. It was unbelievable. They were co-written by the Democrat senator and the Republican congressman, and they just went right through the quickest things Arizona's had go through our house in forever. And why that happened was because they actually met, like their teams met, did all the paperwork and hashing out, but the leaders, the actual people who get all the flack, who aren't allowed to reach across the aisle, we need to find, like, it's painful to watch this corner of the internet where people are defending, I guess it depends where you are here, but people are actually defending the Sam Harris comments things like that, because it just shows a lack of intimacy. If you flip it the
Mhm,
other way,
mhm.
you get this disgust look. And I go, then what, what is happening? And it's really scary to me to see that inverse logic. And but there's a logic behind it. That's what's like super scary to me. You can rationalize it. Like Mark and I can rationalize pretty much anything you give us. Doesn't mean we agree with it. Eugenics, rational, pure evil,
Mhm.
pure evil. No way around it. You cannot do that. And it seems like everybody is convinced that eugenics is a good idea now. And they don't want to say that, but they're all acting to that. That's what I see in the world now. And it's kind of it's like they're so disassociated with themselves that they don't really care if there's a preservation so long as things move forward. Well, I want things to move forward, but I also kind of want to be part of it. Like I don't want to not exist just to allow something else. It's a very strange perversion. It's like self-sacrifice is a wonderful good. It's a great virtue. And then when you push that virtue all the way to the highest, our culture is now making us self-sacrifice for things that we don't even care about, that aren't our goal. And
So I'm still thinking about this meeting that you're talking about, and what I heard when you were speaking is that there was this focus on the disagreement, and somehow magically that focus from the disagreement turned to the focus on the communion instead, as a consequence of breaking bread.
in the meeting, yes. Yeah. Like the Republican congressman and the Democratic senator have no issues now. Where I work with their staff, and their staff are like good with each other. They don't care what part of the aisle they're on. We all see each other as like, oh, this is a good thing for America. I'm glad I'm in a community that's doing this thing.
Mhm,
This
mhm,
thing they're doing isn't dissociated from them. It's not like they're doing this. It's not like they're working on a thing. It was for our water. So my county basically is the only county in Arizona that has our own water supply. Everybody else has to like be part of the big chain. They're all taking from the same big well, which means they have to buy in and do all these extra steps. And even though when we were there and everything was so good, I have yet to find one paper article, anything that makes it seem like what happened was good. Both sides lost face for participating and prioritizing America and prioritizing their community and prioritizing what they figure is good. And I hope it's going to pay off in the long run, but that's super heartbreaking for me to see people doing the right thing, and yet the perception, it's like almost impossible to frame the perception in a way to people who have any vested interest. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, that's bad. And it's like, how could that be bad? It got through the houses in 7 days. It must be good. Everybody agreed. So the whole point, the point of a democracy is, a democracy is failing if you're having to go to votes. Why? The point of a democracy was to talk it out. Everybody should more or less be able to move this thing forward because we all agree where it's going. The death of
mhm.
democracy is the vote. That's a quote from back in the 1700s or 1600s. It's like very strange to me that people don't know that. They want to preserve the integrity of things that are antithetical to the actual spirit of what we're trying to do. We don't need to argue if we actually agree on where we're headed. Then we just need to figure out how to head there. So
So I can imagine that there's a sense of feeling threatened, right? Like people are using the word culture war,
yeah.
and that people are in a war mindset,
Hmm.
and if you're in a war mindset, you're focused on what is there to lose as opposed to what is there to gain.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's
And so you think the intimacy is allowing people to step out of the the lost mindset.
okay. Maybe you just kind of sparked something in me. I think perhaps the intimacy, when you're having intimacy, it must be nested or rooted in yeah, it's kind of hard. I'm thinking of the Civil War. So I may need to like speak a moment before I can even really land that thought, because in the Civil War, for people who don't know the basics, essentially the Methodist Church said you can no longer be a member of the church and own a slave. That moved into the Republican Party. And when the Republican Party said you can no longer be a Republican Party member and own a slave, that's when guns were being shot. And it said brother against brother. What they were talking about is genuinely churches ripping in half, and then genuinely brothers shooting each other. I think that intimacy is the reason that we had a civil war. America's Civil War is one of the most strange things in humans' history. How it unfolded and where it ended. Stonewall Jackson won every battle and lost the war. Um, so it just teaches you so much. But that intimacy is probably the only reason that war actually took place, because how it rifted wasn't these separate people. It was the churches literally ripping in half. And then the party literally ripping in half and saying, you cannot be a member if you do this. And so that intimacy is required. And
What can you make the connection to intimacy a bit more? Like what do you mean?
sure, I mean, I really wish I knew where this is from, but it's just too old. There's two kinds of people. There's people who divide the world into different little categories, and then there are people who don't. So some people just see everybody as people. And when the society falls to almost everybody seeing everybody in categories and not seeing people just as people, those two ways conflict. And I think that the intimacy is somehow, that's what I'm trying to say. I think the intimacy needs to be nested in those two worldviews. Do you believe that people are intrinsically different more, or intrinsically more and similar, more more brethren? Are we brothers or not? That's genuinely the idea. Are we all kin? Are we more alike, or are we more different? And if you focus on what's different, that intimacy will drive you apart. And if you focus on how we're all somehow similar, that intimacy can drive you together. Because I see the intimacy as fracturing, because we had this stupid IDW going just fine for 5 seconds, and then their closeness, they all had dinner together. What good did that do? We have a picture of them all going to get dinner together, and they're still acting like little children. Well, intimacy not grounded in something deeper is really scary. And that's why I was talking earlier about,
So
I think our language has that subject object inner outer mapping, and that's not always how it is.
so the way that I can visualize that is you have dogma, which is like the markers on the boundary, right? That
Mhm.
that plot the land effectively.
Yep.
And that's the category, right? Like the markers define the space. And so if you can only work together if your space is big enough, what's it, a Mendel plot or whatever, like where you have overlapping spheres, right? When the area is overlapping, you can work together, right?
Yeah.
So if there's people who have basically the biggest available category, right? Like made in the image of God, for example.
Made in the image of
right?
God. Oh, yep.
Then you have a capacity to cooperate. And like this is where we need to be careful, right? Because made in the image of God doesn't mean being friends, right? Like there's still a distinction between being friends and being made in the image of God. But yeah, so having these categories and having these ways of relating that allow for cooperation and yeah, right. Like if everybody's huddled in their sphere that's not connecting to the other sphere or something, right? Then you get this utilitarian relationships, right? Because like the only way that I can interact with you is by what you can give to me, so
A
that I
transaction.
can in my sphere.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, I think someone who can see everyone in one category if you can take that step, you may be able to see the world as if what we live in a time of plenty, even when we don't. So even if you're in a famine, you can still celebrate and live as if it's a feast and give and be bountiful with what you do have. Regardless of what you have enough. And if you really know that, you don't covet what you have and worry about it. So like it's Sermon on the Mount, really basic, just Sermon on Mount stuff. But like that I genuinely think is the issue, because people don't have a relationship with themselves enough to realize that they extend in the future. Um, great work on, when you ask how much has people changed in the last 10 years, they'll say, oh, I've changed tremendously. How much will you change in the next 10 years? Oh, not at all. I'm good. I'm right where I want to be. And it's like, that's just not how, that's how you know someone's in that trap, is they fall prey to that. And that's a very perennial problem. It's not like our culture made it. I just think that people aren't even giving themselves a time to really have a relationship with themselves that's going to go forward.
Mhm.
And so those sacrifices and those things, you need to be tethered to them. You have to have real skin in the game, but they also, it's weird, they also need to be abstract enough that they're not here yet. You need to, bring heaven on earth, more or less.
So
And
in my church, they have they've been really focusing on planting the seed at the end, right, where you give the
mhm,
money to the church, and that you connect that to wanting to change somewhere in your life, right? Like so you're making a commitment
mhm,
for a mental seed or a spiritual seed with the physical planting of the seed, and what is that doing, right? Like it's putting you in a relationship to your future, right? Like, and it's making a sacrifice, right? Like that is analogous to the sacrifice that you need to make in order to manifest the new thing in your life. And I think that's the relationship that you were talking about, right? Like
yes,
people need to be aware and they need to participate in acting that out. And if you just get your taxes, right, like just detracted from whatever your income is, right, you're not making that sacrifice. You're not
no,
willingly paying that, right? Like it's
no,
not a choice. It's not a ritual that you participate in. It's just the
wow,
thing that you have to do. And and I think that's so we've lost our the meaning in the participation.
yeah,
So what we had this year, every year we have a Prinsjesdag in the Netherlands, which is where the king reads the new policy from the government, and so that's the connection between the royalty and politics, right? Like it's manifested, but it's in some sense it's become this show, it's become this dressing, right?
hmm,
Well, in reality, it's way more, right? Like the
yeah,
symbolism is an active participation, but like people
yeah,
can't treat it like that anymore. There's an inability or lack of intimacy with the ritual.
yeah. It's like we can read a story and see how these people in this story, how their kingdom is risen, whatever fantasy worlds you want to go to. There's like a whole layer of how things got to where they are, and we can map that on. But then when we want to say, okay, there's one in real life also, there's actually real kings. All of your ancestors had to do a lot to get here. If you've made it to the year 2020, you are related to murderers, thieves, bad people. Like
Rapists.
that's all that we came from. Sorry, read all history books. And when you were just talking about the seed, I've had an awesome conversation recently, and we basically got into the two tellings of the parable of the seed, because one of them has the perspective of the seed, and the other one is the perspective of the sound of the ground, the dirt. Because the seed that's planted in the tilled dirt, the dirt that's been broken, maybe it was a path, maybe it was something, but tilled dirt is dirt that's broken, and you know that's the one that you can plant seed in and actually have any movement. So I guess
Well,
that's
it's
what I was trying to
words,
refer
right?
to
It's not
earlier.
broken, it's worked.
Yeah, it worked. Well, yeah, broke. Well, yeah, I would say it's broken and then put back. Exactly. I guess that's my framing, is broken, not worked. See, there you go. And yeah, working the land. I guess I also live in Arizona where it's clay and granite, so it's breaking the ground here. But one of my favorite terms, I use this when I do like public presentations or ask for funds, is it's a Greek quote that's like, society grows when old men plant trees they will never sit in the shade of. And that's pretty much what I wish most people would focus on, is that type of thing. You know, what a beautiful thing they could be doing. They can make an orchard. We could participate in this wonderful project. And beauty is very difficult, but you can at least recognize. Maybe you're not good at making something beautiful, but when you stumble upon something that you can help with and you know it's beautiful, that can let you know it's probably has some truth and some goodness in it. It's going to be very hard to, and I think that's the loop that I've been seeing lately, because there's even beauty now in our culture and in our world currently has been reified and extremed so much that it's become ugly. It's become,
Well,
you can't
it's
appreciate.
become slick, right?
Yeah,
Instead of
smooth
beautiful,
and
it's
yeah,
become slick, right? Like,
yep,
so there's an aerodynamic term, right? Like it has no resistance. So
yep,
so
yes,
when I look at it, it's not insulting me, right? Like it's
yep,
not confronting me with reality, but instead it's letting me be without strain. That
hmm,
disallows growth, right? Like
yep,
it,
100%.
so yeah, well, I can go into the romantics. I'm not gonna go there.
Well, but I think that's where our, I think that romantic impulse is the issue right now, though, somehow. That romantic Rousseauian drive where we think somehow there's an idyllic, and if we could keep things slate, like we all just want to stay babies. I can't understand why our culture all wants to stay children and stay babies.
But I don't
It's
I don't think the romantics were like that, right? Like I think they were like will to power. Just like I can will away. So I don't think they were out of
well, it's
the
pathos. It's pathos over logos. That's the romantic thing. Their passions completely go before and subvert logos. And so that's why I literally see it like a child. Whereas in Aeon, so the Jungian, let's speak the basic Aeon thing, when you go all the way through development, what you're going to find at the end is your inner child, right? So you want to have a relationship with your inner child, which allows you to have curiosity and wonder in the world, while not, but you'll still not, you won't be such a child to the point that you'll be calling victim. So
right.
that's
Well, what's the childlike state? Well, the child has no categories,
not, yeah.
right? So
Well, I mean,
the child has to develop,
way,
right? So it's the state of growth.
well, I mean, actually, now that I think a little, even children have what's the level we call that? Basic. I think the nomenclature is basic level of categories. So they can see separate, but then in mind, for example, like one of my favorite Anderson Todd ideas is when he's talking about that theory of mind thing. A child genuinely understands the mind of their parent before they even are aware that they have a mind running. Like I can remember my dad patting my head, and that's like one of my first memories, because I can remember how that's like not how my dad talks to me, and then what he said, and like all these movements. And there's definitely a disruption right now between those movements. I think people are too intimate on a smooth level, and then they're not intimate at all about the actual rough. And that creates this like, ooh,
Well, I think actually I can solve that because I what does a child have? Well, you say child has categories. Well, it has the capacity for categories, right? Like I don't,
there you go, boom, yes,
right? But
capacity for it.
but in a sense, everything is a monster for a child, right? Like the thing that defies the categories, right? And then it has to interact with it but it's scary, right? So that's why a child goes back to mom, because it gets overwhelmed by the scariness, right? And then it slowly develops categories, right? And that's how you. But then there might be categories that you don't develop, right? Like if you never get pat on the head and you never develop that insight, right? Like maybe you never get it, right? Like so maybe that category never comes into being in your mind, and then like this is I think what happens with autism is that you develop a set of categories, and you start working from there, and then you start developing strategies
Yeah.
that are on a
It's all
higher level.
accommodation. Yeah, and in Pijonian term, it's all accommodation, no assimilation. You're supposed to be able to condense those things and then be able to move past them. And I
Right,
really agree with that. It's like you're stuck just
yeah, but you're building
without the
like a
ability.
bridge, right? Like instead of that you're building a tower, you're building like this bridge from somewhere else to.
Oh, yikes. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
because it's a bridge, it's not grounded, right? So,
It's
so,
not
so,
gonna, yeah.
so now you're stuck in a procedural relationship instead of having the capacity to participate with what you're doing. So yeah, let's get back to young you, since we're kind of there, because I want to move through the narrative a little
Sure.
bit. I think we got the categories kind of straight now. So yeah, like how does intimacy develop for you? Like, are there significant
Um,
milestones?
yeah, I mean, I got put into martial arts when I was very young. So watching my older siblings like fight and stuff when I was a little kid. And then my brother, who's 11 years older than me, he doesn't really know how to like turn the other cheek. So he would kind of like, if someone got rowdy, my brother would always be the one who just like ended it. And so I didn't want to be like my brother. And I wanted to be able to like keep my cool regardless of what's happening. My brother basically got kicked out for not being able to keep his cool. And I started training martial arts when I was like 4 or 5. And then I stopped for a little while. I went to a really intense traditional school. So the same 90 kids from kindergarten through 8th grade. And then most of us went on to college together still. And Greek and Latin roots, all that jazz, like a traditional schooling, very intense. Polo shirts, had to have my shirt tucked in or I got a referral, no logos or anything. And that group of us, for a while, we were really, I mean, like every day we're close and have contact. Like I'm in the same classes all day long with the same group of kids, all of my schooling. That's like what humans have usually done more or less. As you were, so I had a more literal traditional upbringing. And my 3rd grade teacher was very, uh, she took it on herself to really make a pet project of me and 2 other kids. And that really ended up being like detrimental to my ability to associate with people. Um, she like really abused us and like mentally and physically and stuff. And that that really started a spiral in my head of not knowing how to trust people. And the only other, so like authority figures, my dad's a professor, so off the bat I like teachers, and so here's a teacher who's abusing me, so I'm going to rationalize that it's okay. I'm in 3rd grade. And then um
So hold on, what is
yeah,
was there? Do you know the reason why she did that? Why she picked you?
she really thought that the 3 of us were exceptional. That was the word. This was the 90s, and there was, I forget the name of it then, the Head Start was coming out. She was against Head Start. She said it was this blah 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 thing, and she was trying to give us gifted. We are the gifted students. So she had basically fought to get me and these 2 other kids into her class, and then she didn't let us really go to recess or anything. She just like overtrained us. I stopped learning in 3rd grade more or less because she like taught me Latin and Greek and like forced me and these 2 other kids to really like I couldn't get a good grade. There was nothing I could do to get a good grade. Even if I got 100%, she would say my spelling wasn't clear enough, and she'd give me a B plus. Like literally, I never. She would she made it an impossible standard. She had this insight in her head where she had read the literature on gifted children, and it's like, you need to keep them in the proximal zone of growth and all these things. She wanted to help us, and what she did was like
But she proceduralized it.
completely destroyed me and these two other kids. Sammy killed herself when she was like, before we were in middle school. So in middle school, she had taken her life, and Matt was literally dealing drugs and stuff by high school. And then in college, he was in college. He was the only one of us who didn't go to college. He was dealing heroin to his meth habit. That's like, holy shit. Like the rest of us are all not. Like I'm the only one who even knows what that looks like because of my family being all drug addicts and stuff. So I'm like, all the kids at my school don't know what that is. They don't know what the smell of burnt foil smells like. They just like, it smells gross in there. And I'm like, yeah, that's that's not a good smell. Glad you guys don't know what it is. But so yeah, that really spiraled us. And then I just became the most like difficult. When I was 11, my dad put me in another martial arts studio. And basically I just like lived there as much as I could because they treated me like an adult. And yeah, the other one that really messed me up was right around then. I went to a Baptist church. My parents, Southern Baptist in the Bible Belt, just have no choice in the matter. And the church I happened to go to was the same one of this guy named Bobby Fischer, who ended up being like a crazy person who killed his family and stole money from things and was on the FBI's most wanted. And I had like been to that place. I knew Bobby Fischer Jr. My mom painted his face at church like a few weeks before we look on TV and there's a manhunt for this guy. And he used to like yell at my sister for smoking cigarettes and say, you better get used to that smoke, sister, because you're going to be burning in hell, stuff like that. And then he's literally the guy who kills his family, goes on the run, extorts a bunch of money from his business and his church. And he was like a prominent leader in the church that I grew up in. I saw him every Sunday. And it was very strange not being able to, I just did not trust church people anymore. Like just off the bat. And that took me a long time to even kind of start approaching any of that. But someone like him, he was just like upstanding. Nobody had ever said anything bad about Mr. Fisher when I was a kid until he's on the news, FBI's most wanted. And so that kind of like huge swing really made me not trust people. And then I got my ass kicked once when I was 11. I like saw my friends getting beat up by some older kid. So I like run my bike over and just started mouthing off to the guy, and he like picked me up and just beat the crap out of me. And I was 11, he was like an adult. So he literally was just like picking me up and hitting me and throwing me. And I just kept talking so my friends could run away. And those little moments, like he could not stop me. I broke his fingers, and I was like, every time he got to me, I was hurting him. But I'm a little kid, and he couldn't like figure out what to do. Like he's literally just picking me up and throwing me, and that let me know that like this martial arts stuff I do, I like train in punch bags and stuff. And it's like that doesn't really do any good when someone's twice your size and literally is angry and just wants to hurt you. And so I think that the intimacy really, here's a fact that most people probably don't realize is like a lot of murders are from domestic partners. Like the first suspect we look at when someone's murdered is their partners and recent partners. And it's like this intimacy leads into a level where you care so much that you will kill someone. You'll kill them. And we need to be careful because I see this as like a life or death, literally a life or death thing where I was working at the martial arts studio at like age 14. I'd be 15 because I was the manager then. So I was working at the front, not just in the back. And a lady walked in and I could tell she just had like anger. I was pretty good at reading people and started talking to her about all the classes we offer at the studio we work at. We have a bunch of different martial arts instructors that can, give you 2 free classes in any of the styles you like, but I train with all of them. So if you talk to me, I can kind of find where you want to go. Well, after talking to her for a little bit, I realized she had been assaulted recently. So I kind of pressed and then found out she had been sexually assaulted by a coworker and hadn't told anyone. So she wanted to go learn martial arts so she could defend herself and then go hurt him. And I'm like, hit the brakes. Like, I can't teach you martial arts now, like legally, because I'll be like helping you commit murder. What we need to go do is stop him because he's probably doing it to other women. And when I said that to her, I watched her, like, her anger flickered another direction. She realized she's not going to be the only victim. She probably wasn't the only victim. And it, like, I can just remember that moment very distinctly of this woman's anger shifting and realizing, oh, I can't just go kill the guy. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you just want to make all the women braver. And yeah, so like that level of intimacy. I mean, she was raped by a coworker, and here she is wanting to learn martial arts so she can go kill him back. And like that's genuinely was her plan. And people don't know that's in them. You know, if people have never been hurt, they don't know just how much damage you can go cause like real quick, especially if you're nice and you have like a lot of opportunities in front of you.
Smooth life.
Yeah, you can then you can get real rough.
Right. So I'm going back to being informed by the other, right? So so you can just imagine, right? Like when you have interaction and like it's shallow, it's like, well, but then at a certain point, right? Like you shape around the other person.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, there's a
especially,
conformity.
right. And especially if you don't have the grounding, and maybe that's what you wanted to go into with the intimacy has to be grounded, right? Because if you don't have a groundedness on your own, you're grounded in the intimacy, right? And then
that's bad.
If the other person changes shape, right? Like and now it doesn't fit anymore, like what are your options, right? Like your options are either self-destruction or anger, right? Like that person has to go back into the old shape.
Yep. That's, I mean, yeah, that's, you said it pretty well. That's really where I'm seeing that issue is it's not, if you don't have that bigger container for your lingo, that container for it to literally sit in, right? To be put within that boundary space, I am terrified of what intimacy is doing because we're in our frontal, we're able to like be in other people's fantasies now. If I go on someone's well catered social thing, I don't see them. I see the image of them that they wish they were, and or some weird layer there that's not
right. And everybody's
actual.
playing along.
And everybody's playing along. That's where that conformity. And then when you meet them in real life, and it's like, oh, they smell funny. Like one of my favorite pastors, he has a smell that's so particular. It's like, I don't know how to say this about Paul, but I know he has the same smell. I know Paul does because he has the same genetic background, more or less, but he also has the same presence. And I've been in the room with hundreds of pastors and hundreds of clergy members of different ranks. Some of them have, you can smell their breath and smell like their presence. And that's a level of connection and closeness and intimacy that when I think about him, I got one breath where I could smell my Pastor Carl. Like it was very like on accident, like just thinking about it made it so I actually smelled it. And there's really big levels, but he was able to be extremely intimate with me because thinking back, the guy who kind of brought me to Christ, I was coaching Special Olympics. My nephews had a bunch of brain surgeries and cannot speak. So perfectly able to hear and stuff, but literally there's been Black and Decker drill bits through the part of his brain that's the speech center. So he just genuinely is trapped, unable to speak. He's on the special needs team and I just really enjoy coaching. It was track and field and they were doing the relay thing and there was a bunch of extra people. So I was just over talking to the parents. I had no idea the guy I'm talking to. We're talking about Bible stuff. We get into the book of Joshua, and I'm talking about how, you know, if I have an iron sword and you have a bronze sword, it doesn't matter if you're a better sword fighter than me. I win because my sword breaks yours. Like you block, and my sword makes a big chunk out of yours, and mine looks fine. So Israelites were walking around with lightsabers, cutting everybody in half because, you know, it's pretty amazing. And then he explained why he thinks that was, and then let me know, oh, you should come to my church on Sunday. I'm the pastor at the Methodist church. And I'm like, oh, because I would have never gotten intimate about talking about the Bible or anything with this guy if I knew he was a pastor, but he actually snuck that up on me and didn't let me know that he's a, he's a preacher every day. Like he's basically the only reason that I'm like sane is that man entering my life. And could not have been a weirder set of circumstances, but the container there was his daughter has special needs and I'm coaching her, and all these like strange interaction, these strange movements that really allow people to see that their life couldn't be made up. It can't just be a solipsistic projection. There must be something I'm in contact with, and I can change what's out there. Not very much, maybe, but I can have some influence on the world out there. And that means for sure that other people in the world itself can have influence on me. So yeah, because he really can like that conversation, the confidence he had, he wasn't being rude to me, but he could tell I'm in my mid-20s. I'm a very nihilistic, I'm a rough person. You can't trigger warning me. And like, I don't have a level where I'm like, oh, let's not go there. I can go to the end. And to have someone be able to really take me on like that, who's happily raising a special needs daughter and doing all these things, I was like, oh, this could be real. Maybe all that stuff that I love to make fun of, it's probably real because this guy's staking his whole life on it. And so that level of intimacy, that one relationship definitely is the most recent one that kind of opened me up to see like, oh, he thinks all that's real. Like, and he's willing to like pull apart his day and, go take a lunch for me. And these little movements. And then it ended up, the guy who did the ceremony for my wedding was that pastor. So definitely a strange connection, because I was really being like flippant. My reading of the book of Joshua was not orthodox. It was very flippant. Right? And he, instead of taking a defense like anybody I'd ever dealt with on that side, he like explained it to me and unfolded why it was that way. And that took a level of intimacy, but also the container had to be there. Like I said, that special needs coach or whatever, talking to a special needs parent is different than other places where you'd have a normal conversation.
So you're kind of touching on it, but there is a sense where you could still have waved that off, right? Like,
oh yeah,
like being
I wanted
a skeptic, right?
I wanted to so bad. My girlfriend at the time, my now wife, she was christened she was christened in the Methodist. Her family's been Methodist for like multiple generations. She was christened in the same gown that her great grandfather was christened in at a Methodist church. And then the pastor, Carl Peterson, when he came back to the church, when he left the corporate world and decided to become a pastor, now he's a reverend, was because he was helping his Orthodox priest friend do a liturgy, and he didn't want it to be empty. He was kind of new, so there wasn't like a big following, but he didn't want to perform a liturgy by himself. So he invited Carl to come. And so he invited his Methodist friend who works in like government military section of the world to just sit down. The Holy Spirit hit Carl. He quit his job and everything and goes into being a pastor. And then way too many little things that hit back for me, where it's like, he didn't convert me to Methodism at all. Like, he genuinely was more concerned about Christ, which opened me up to where I became a member of the United Methodist Church, which was clown world, whole other story. But it's just strange how like I know it had to be placed, but I totally had the option. I wanted to say no. Then my wife started going to church there every Sunday, or my girlfriend at the time, we weren't married yet. And she's like, that's the church I used to go to when I was a kid. They had a program, blah, blah, blah. I like that place. My wife's safe there. And my wife is never safe. So Methodist church became safe place for Emily, my girlfriend. So that became good. And then all of a sudden everything moved. Like the container definitely unfolded around that.
So is she the reason then that you stuck it out?
I mean, her and I basically did a really bad breakup right around then, and uh, complicated. She's had a very difficult life, and we basically, whenever one of us would not want to go, the other would want to go. And we somehow just like forced each other monotonously. Everybody in the church is 16 up, and my wife and I are like 33 and 28. And it's like, this is kind of awkward. Or 25 to 28, that time frame for me. So it was like, literally, I'm less than half the age of everybody in the congregation. My wife kind of remembers how it was 20 years ago when they had a youth program, but now there's no kids. And so it's like we're living in this double thing of what I'm living of where it could be, she's living where it was. And neither of us are actually here right now looking around going, you know, in the Bible study, they just told me that Isaiah has multiple authors. Why am I in a Bible study with someone who's not a Christian, doesn't believe the Bible? Like Isaiah is clearly authored by one person, written down by a bunch of people. Like the book of Isaiah explains that, but here they are giving me atheist arguments for how the Bible is not really saying what it says. And I'm like, how is this a Bible study? You guys are undoing the Bible. Like, anyways, so that whole movement of the container shifting around me, and that's right when the culture war was picking up. And then I got wrapped into becoming a vice president for a nonprofit and like all these weird movements. And I really like when I run a support group, for example, why I like Fidelity for support groups, AA, doesn't matter what type. When you're choosing to go one of those support groups, there's guidelines and principles. And that sets the container of where you're going to be. Here's the guidelines. This is what we're doing. We're going to structure it this way. Here's the principles. We're going to follow these rules. We're going to empathize with other people's situation. We're not going to judge other people's pain as less than our own. Here's all these like basic things that when you read it, it gives you permission to go, okay, that's the rule here. And then all of a sudden that container allows the movement, because I run really structured support groups that keep fidelity, and all of them feel so different because depending on what topic is brought up. We had a guy bring up being overjoyed, for example, and it was like everybody was able to relate because he's overjoyed, but he's a manic depressive. So right now he's really on an up, and he's really scared because he knows what he's going to be going down soon. And it's like he felt safe to be able to explain that to a group of people who could explain it back to him and relate. But you need a space for that to be there, a container for it. So I think part of the intimacy crisis would be, literally using your guys' lingo, the lack of a container, the lack of respecting the container. So in Vervaeke lingo, it's set and setting. Everybody has set and setting, but we're forgetting sacred. You need a sacred. So we have the set, we have this container, or I mean, they have the set. We have this thing we're going to do. To me, we have a setting, the container, and then we need and then the sacred is what we're going to orient to. Exactly. That's what we can tell us towards. And that's where you and I don't need to be a friend. We can at least be moving towards that, moving towards how this can actually embetter us and enrich our lives. That can be the thing that we're actually moving. That could be what's sacred. And I really like the word fellowship. Not only am I a token nerd, I just think that's somehow hitting the correct word. Is seeking fellowship is much more important than most things. You can only be friends with a few people, but you can be in fellowship with everyone around you if you can properly.
Well, can you though? Because like,
Well, so even if
you
that
need to
proper relationship
sacrifice a
is
lot
them turning.
for that, right? Because
Yeah.
and you, because you need to follow towards the same goal, right? So that's kind of where the constraint is, and like where I
Yep.
think things like church are really important, because that is the container that allows for the fellowship, right? Like, and it's also couched in terms of family, not so much in terms of friendship, which is also interesting, right? But yeah, so I want to go back a little bit to this container, right? Because are you saying that the constraints of the container allow people a move set that that is maybe not natural to them, but gives them a way to participate without having the intuitive capacity for participation.
There you go. Yeah. Some people lack that intuition. There are people who genuinely lack the intuition. And the people who have it are the ones called to really set those parameters, the dogma. And those need to be
To
moving.
shepherd.
But that's what they are called to do. The scariest thing I think Jesus has said is the parable of the talents. Because some people are given 1 talent, and that's all it's expected in return of them. Some people are given 3 talents, and they're expected 3 extra in return. But if you're given a lot of talents, you're not just expected to return, you're expected a full return on what you were given. Like, that is terrifying if you really are hearing that. That's
Yeah, that's when
really
you need to
scary.
fall on your knees and ask for mercy.
So yeah, pray for mercy. Because yeah, I mean, I myself, I've been diagnosed, like, lay it out. I get told I'm very lay on the cards on the table type of person. I definitely had a type B personality, and yet I feel like God has found a way to genuinely grow me and construct me and allow me to be useful part of the body without me not being. Like 20% of the population have the role model type. It's called the role model type. And it's like a basics, 20% of people have a very standard, they're just like a person. And that's great. We need them. There's nothing wrong. But it's just like there are exceptions. There's always these weird movements. And when you look at the history of the church, you have the most extreme dichotomies possible. Someone like Peter and someone like Paul. Best teachers in the world, Roman citizen, lowly fisherman has a boat. Like, and yet here they are, the 2 pillars. And so I think that we need to find ways to really respect the sacredness of where we're going, but also have faith that this place that we're part of, this container that we all are sharing, has more than what we could possibly calculate. We can't possibly calculate it all in. If you go out on a limb and you just pretend, and not just pretend, but really believe that you live in a time of plenty and you live in a time of good, you can bring that forth. And you can be living in a very good time and be pessimistic and bring bad times to you, and vice versa. So I think that inner world, the romantic impulse, has something good to it, where it's, if you do, there's a smidgen there, right? Like that romantic impulse, if you do want to improve the world, there is something you could do to improve it.
Well,
but can you change the whole thing, or change? That's where.
yeah, well, free will is real, right? And the question is, well, how does it work, and how much of it do you have?
Yeah, because you don't want too much. I mean, I really like that. I really liked how Vivek put it recently with something with like, I want free will so long as it's allowing me to attune to these things that I consider greater than me. Because if I have free will at the cost of all others, then I don't want that. And that's why I'm kind of grateful that I die, is because I'm pretty convinced that I can't get good enough. I just want to keep getting better. That's my goal, is to improve and get better. But I think that's why Christ said only God is good, is more or less we're called to be getting better, and called to be working towards better than perfection. But it's kind of like earlier, God isn't an ultimate being. God isn't being good, but God is the only thing that is good. It's a very strange. It's like the, we're not going to go into the word self, but there's these weird things. If a tornado is self-organizing but lacks a self, right? There's these weird ways that I think we're getting mixed up. We think that the container is doing the magic, and we forget that our relationship with it is. Or sometimes we think that it's just a relationship with the telos, with the thing we want, the sacred. That's doing all the magic. And I think it's actually all these things multifaceted, and every time we try and reify them, we're somehow missing these other important aspects, because how are we going to make a container online except for people who want to show up? You can't force them to sit and watch these videos where two
Can
random guys
try.
talk for an hour and a half, right? You just
So,
can't. But we can somehow we are participating in doing something here where little nuggets get transformed in something that happened years ago are actually being brought forth, and maybe they're only going to be brought forth because of this strange conversation now, and someone else may do the actual layup, but maybe you and I need to get the ball across the court. So
well, okay, so I'm gonna nerd out a little bit again. So yeah, I I don't like the self and self-organizing for a tornado, because I somehow think that's a wrong word, because now the tornado has an identity or whatever, right? Like, but but I think what is special about humans is that they have the capacity to adjust what they identify of as self, right? So I can identify with what I see, but I can identify with my body. I can identify with the combination of what I see with my body, but I can also identify with you, right? And now we're like, or better said, I can identify with my communion with you, right? And and so having that capacity to go up and down in in the identification, but I can only identify with you if I know that we're a body, right? So we can only be a body if we're attuned to the same head and looking in the same direction, right? And that doesn't mean that we individually look at the direction, but our communion is producing the same direction as we want to go. And so it's, yeah, to bring that back to intimacy, right? Like I think this capacity to who am I, right? And then you can bring back, well, Christianity is this bringing together of all these people in the past in some sense, right? Because they all identified in the same way, more or less, hopefully, but um, ideally, like, let's just talk ideally. So yeah, there is something powerful there, and there's a participation in that, and I think when you're talking about feeling that you're affluent, right? Like it's talking about, well, what is your capacity to identify, right? So you can either identify with the threat, the lack of affluence, right? Or you can say, no, like there's a higher thing, and I get my identity through that thing, and I don't let the immediacy of my flesh inform the way that I think and the way that I react. And damn it, I think I wanted to make a connection, but I lost it.
because what you were discussing there to me is, so I run support groups, and my two favorite support groups I run are from NAMI, which is National Anti-Mental Illness. So one is called Family to Family, and one is called Peer to Peer. Family to Family is someone in your family, very loose definition, just someone close to you, has mental illness, and you're at this support group so that you can have a better relationship with that person who has a mental illness. That's the family to family. There's also peer to peer, which is people suffering from mental illness going to a support group. How can I be, less disruptive to my loved ones? How can I have a better relationship with myself? That's how I frame it to the group, because we go through this cycle thing. And when I'm in the peer to peer, the family to family, I always hearken every single time when we're doing the principles and check-in that which one we're in, because people will very often in the family fall in and start talking about themselves, or in the peer one start talking about how they're, whoever is driving them nuts. But in the peer-to-peer class, we're there to talk about our relationship with ourselves and how we are going to be interacting. And I really think that it's an amazing feature of when we're talking all the time. You were just, it's amazing. So the idea of the capital I agree with you that it has the ability to relate at different levels or different movements. That's what makes it what it is. It's why it can't define itself. It's why it can't look back on itself. It has no ability. The moment it's defining what it's part of, that's the me or the myself. That's no longer the I. And so that movement is, I think, where we're supposed to somehow be, because there's nothing more familiar to you than that, right? You are that I. That's the most familiar thing. But when you go to try and express it in any way, there is nothing more distinct and foreign, because it has that dichotomy in it. And I find that's the beautiful root of where most of these relationships need to nest from. So when Sally and I have talked about, like, from the void and stuff, it's like, well, it's that void of something that I could be that intimate with. There's nothing more intimate of a relationship that I could have than the relationship I have with myself, with me. Yet I can't even put like a word to it without just instantly being able to just, what happened to you just now, where it's like, whoop, thoughts don't allow you to move. So that's the most fascinating thing. That's why when Peterson said, people who can talk about obvious things, that's a talent. Yes, being able to talk about something that is obvious is difficult.
Yep.
It's really difficult to say obvious things because you take them for granted. You can't. It's hard to recognize them.
Mhm. Well, yeah, but I'm no longer thinking about things. I'm thinking about processes, right? So things that are evolving
Yeah.
throughout
Well, I mean,
time.
a definition of a thing is a process unfolding through time. So there's
Is it
smart
though?
ass. Well, that's what a smart ass like me can do, because that's how I will define a thing. Is so
Well,
God is no thing because he's not just a process unfolding through time. He is the ground of all processes unfolding through. See, like rhetoric and stuff is slippery. It's brutal.
I'm
But
just
I
gonna
just find that.
look it up.
I
Well,
think it's.
that's not a definition that Google is giving me, but okay. But um, but yeah, like so when you're talking about the unfolding, there's an element that the thing that unfolds doesn't have an identity anymore, right? Like you can't
You
squeeze
can't
it
make. Yeah. Yeah. You
into
can't.
something flat, right? So now you need to talk about like an essence, right? Because we talked about this gravitational pull earlier, right? Like that it's still forming around something, right?
Yeah.
But it's not graspable what it's forming around, and even if you can grasp what it's forming around, then it's not that because it's around.
Yeah. It's the word coming to mind is substantial. It's something is substantial if you can't help but it's there. It's important, but it's also so like in Christian lingo, it's like so many fights about where the transubstantiation happens. And what they should disagree with is that it happens, that the bread and wine become the body and blood. But if you get really hung up on when that happens, is it when he says this word? Is it when we all close our eyes and say amen? Is it when, like, if that's what you hang up, then you're never going to find it. You'll actually not be able to see the moment of it becoming the blood and body, because you're actually looking for that magic crux. Whereas if you know that that unfolding is going to happen, it's just such a difficult change of perspective. Like you either know something is happening or not. Sometimes it's
well,
at
but
the intimate.
maybe it's right. Like in some sense, you're talking about the object, right? Like I'm trying to identify the characteristic of the object, but like
That's the
if it's
trap.
not in the object, but in your relationship to the object, you
Boom.
can never find it in the
Yeah, you
object.
never. And that's the lens that I see. Because if the mapping of the folk psychology that most people run is something like there's an inner world that I have access to, and then there's the outer world. My inner world is subjective, the outer world is objective. If that's the mapping you're running, then when we're trying to agree on something in the objective outside world changing, that you and I can both subjectively agree that that's happening, then you'll never be able to agree on when and where and how and why, or you'll fall into the weeds. You just need to both acknowledge, and with that acknowledgement, then you can go. But I see our whole culture is, instead of acknowledging that movement and being able to move towards what we're agreeing on, we're fighting in the weeds about where this movement or the little tiny detail.
Well, but maybe it's a change in our belief, right? So, and a change in our belief allows us to act in faith, right? And
Oh yeah.
we, like, the change in our belief is necessary, right? So the ritual is necessary to manifest the new belief, right? Oh, like this is just wine, and now it's not. It's like, so there's, yeah, like, and then, well, what are we talking about at that point, right? Like, 'cause now we're talking about our interface, effectively, right? Like, and
Well,
what is it?
any argument that people are worth losing a friendship over, that's an intimate argument, right? Anything that can bring something to a head where a decision has to be made, I would think that's an intimacy crisis. Whenever I've heard you guys frame that, I've always thought that an intimacy crisis is basically, I'm going nuclear. I'm going to call back something else, frickin' Chad, to that Jim Brewer guy on Glenn Beck. He's talking about his wife and him, and his wife like goes to Christ and all this stuff, and she's doing great for a few weeks, and then she has a day where she's just awful. She's like back to her old self, being terrible. And he makes the decision in his head, if she comes out of that door and wants like to argue with me, I'm going nuclear. This is the end. I'm not going to be like, I'm not letting her do anything. So Jim makes that decision in his head. She opens that door and is still angry and wants to blame me for everything and all this. We're going through with the divorce. I'm doing this. This is it. She opens the door and she's real solemn and says, like, I'm sorry. I'm going to have moments like this. Please love me. Please forgive me for what I did. I just need some time. And then he's sitting there like, and then he goes like under his breath, he says, "Thank you, Jesus." And he's like, "I always thought that was like a derogatory term." Well, that's what I'm starting to see, is that intimacy crisis is that when you have that moment in your head where this conversation, you're no longer, like, my brother and I are not on great terms right now. Politics, yada yada, and that's so annoying to me. But it happened because like I threw it down. Our brother who overdosed, what my brother was saying, if I took him seriously, that would mean he didn't care that our brother overdosed. He didn't care. So I laid that on him. And I said, no, that's what you're saying is full of shit, Roy. How I know you're full of shit is because our brother died under those circumstances, and I've seen how you acted. I know you care. So you can tell me, you can rationalize you don't care about those pieces of shit junkies, but I know you do, because they're people. And that in that crisis, my brother and I still have not been on very good terms. Like, we'll kind of like show up for family stuff, but like I laid that on my brother. Literally, the death of our other brother, I laid that on him and was like, "How dare you say you don't have that? That didn't affect you, and that didn't change who you are. Like, I remember you before and after. Definitely changed my brother." So those moments of intimacy are those things that like you cannot come back from. Most conversations kind of go away. That intimacy requires all these things to get there, right? You can't just like have an intimate, intense conversation. You have to have a lot of history and all these things. And I think what we need to do is master having those really intimate, difficult, where everything is on the line and it's actually on the line. It's not a performative move. It's not a gesture. It's like, no, if this goes wrong, we could actually no longer be friends. So I'm going to trust you and I'm going to actually go there. And it's not even just be friends, but we'll no longer even be able to be amicable. And that's a risk. And then our culture needs to find a way for forgiveness, because people who have already crossed that, there needs to be a way for repentance. It shouldn't be super easy. You can't just do it forever. But I see we've backed ourselves into corners where we want to have a logical response for everything, and that's not how humans are. We can't have a fully pathos world, but we can't have full
I
rational.
I think that that point that you're talking about also exists in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah.
and we're also not recognizing that, right? Like, so in, because and I is
Yeah.
that no, that's surrender. That's not sacrifice, that's surrender, right? So when you surrender, you give over the authority, right, to the other person, right? And now you're submitting, right? So you're 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 conforming to their will. And that can be something beautiful, right? Because if they love you, right, like they will manifest the good in you,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So that is an opportunity for transformation, right? And that's true vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
in relation to the intimacy. But I think we do that, right? We simulate that process without having the intimacy. So like I think like because why is an idol called an idol, right? Like in a some sense, because who was saying that? Was Peugeot saying it? I don't know. Like someone was saying, well, I listen to these people and I feel like they're my friends. Oh no, Lex Friedman was saying that. Like they're my
Lex.
friends. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're not your friends. They don't know you. Like, and like, why would you consider someone that has no interaction with you your friend?
Okay, well, I mean, that reminds me of the definition of reader. Someone who's a reader is someone who's almost all their friends are dead, right? All their best friends are dead. That's a good reader. And yes, now I'm really grasping what you're on about very often. I think the first time I actually can more precisely see.
Because we were talking about the start, right, where we were effectively saying when you have closeness without connectedness, right? That's it,
Without a real
right?
contact. Yeah.
Right, like there's
You're
no
real close, but you're
conforming.
not actually
Yeah, you're
in
conforming to
contact.
something else. You're conforming to a spirit that has left. It's not a participatory spirit. It's a
No.
dead spirit.
Yeah, it's like a facade. It's that smooth outer shell is all you're conforming to, and it's not the actual inner workings and the manifestations of those processes inside the real thing. No, all of a sudden I'm able to. I think I can start to finally steel man some of our past conversations and see what you were pushing towards. Now I can see that easier, because I'm not able to articulate it quite this moment, but it's something like, wow, that's really hard for me now.
You're like a child.
Well, it's
Watching the
interesting
monster.
there's lots of ways to go from where I'm kind of sitting right now, because what would allow, okay, so I'm going to go back to something I mentioned earlier. Mr. Rogers, he's at a commencement speech for a bunch of kids graduating college. Firstly, they invite him to be the speaker. That's already, a pretty powerful thing. He did a lot of good, but that moment stuck. Like he did that for real. He did that little trick of his more than once where you sit in silence and think about the thing. But that one in particular, it's as if everything was able to really go. Whereas if I really frame it well, I've been able to make a room full of people tear up just considering that exercise, not even fully doing it, because I'm not Mr. Rogers. I can't
Right, and
actually do the
they're
thing.
not in the graduation with
And they're
the,
not at their graduation ceremony about to throw their hat. They're not at all these, that there's so much there. But if I tell the story of, hey, at a graduation ceremony, Mr. Rogers did, and all these things come together, it allows them to kind of see that. And I've had really good conversations because of those moments of intimacy. So I think maybe what I want to bring forth is in our part of this community, if we could find these moments where tensions rise and the intimacy is legitimate and things are actually at stake, there's things on the line for real. Those are the moments that are going to truly show and help people participate and take things into their real life. Because, I mean, yeah, hearing Pajot steelman Foucault, that's pretty shocking. That's a pretty, that takes a lot of courage for someone in his position to make one step towards steelmanning Foucault. Because obviously. And but yet where they were, who they were talking to, where that conversation was, I actually think that we need to be able to ride those difficult things out. What do you do with something that difficult? Peterson and them are at odds. Is all evil just a parasite on the good, or does evil have its own manifest? That's two ways of seeing the world that are very different. What's weird is Vervaeke's usually not on the side of Pajot, but here Pajot and Vervaeke are on one side and Peterson's on the other. And it's weird because I've argued about the agency of demons and stuff for you guys. And it's like, how am I now on the other side of the argument? No matter where I land, when you reframe the argument, all of a sudden you'd think I'd be over here. And it's actually because of where this is aiming, the little nuance, I have to be on this side. It's not even the side, it's where this lands, this is where I am. It's not even choosing a side. It's I can't see it the other way while allowing what I have to continue to go forward. So that's where I think that conformity and that you said it earlier, where it's like if you conform just to that facade or that shell or that smooth outer layer of the thing, then the person grows and changes, and that's going to be just unacceptable to you because you've already completed what you want. It's like it's nice to be at that, like, I got where I want to be. It sucks to realize that, like, it's just going to keep
well, but it doesn't have to be complete, right? Like it can just be, well, like here is my vulnerability, and now we have this flat layer here, and you can never make a dent in this, right? And as long as you're not making a dent in this, we're okay. And
then we're okay.
suddenly
Everything
that dent
is
is going to pop up somehow.
is that something like the sky is falling? So when the person said, Chicken Little says the sky is falling, is it because there's been a dent in there, no one else can see it? If you're the only person who can see that shift coming, like Pajot talking about, he said a flood's coming, all these weird symbolism happens types of moments where it's like, I think these people who have these intuitions, we need to be pretty forthright and let people know what our intuitions are. Even if it's not going to be helpful for you, maybe it's helpful for the person listening or someone else who's there.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I would say the ground is shaking.
There you go.
Right.
There.
But
that's very right.
That's dependent, right? So if you're standing on solid ground, it's the sky that's falling, right? If you're not standing on solid ground, the ground is shaking. So the metaphor is dependent upon your dependency, right? So if it's like
100%.
existential,
yeah,
and I think this is the problem, right? Like we've talked about this stuff a lot. Like for people are so fixated on their worldview, right? Like they're so dependent in their life upon their worldview,
Mhm.
and maybe rightfully so, because that's kind of what your worldview is.
You need
right?
it, but they're fixed on it though. They don't want it to grow. They like it having that smooth
right.
shell on top.
Right, exactly, right. So you have this smoothness, and then there's this bump, right? And then, well, it's like, well, if we put a tree in front of it, we don't have to look at it,
Yeah.
right? And then at a certain point, you do something, right? And then you have this tectonic shift, right? Like you see the plates, and it's like
That's
reverberating everywhere.
yeah. No, I think that perspective is the thing though, because yeah, if you're on solid ground, then when things are falling apart, it has to be the sky is falling. That makes a lot of sense to me. And then the other way, because that's speaking very metaphorical. So if you're not in the like emergence emanation, you probably have no idea what's being talked about, but that's really correct for a viewing, because if you're comfortable going back and forth between, then you can recognize this is a earthquake and the sky is falling right now. Like you guys are arguing about which one, maybe it's both. Or maybe you guys are on a really rocky, where you're at is really rocky and these are stable, where you're at is shaking. So the parallax makes it seem like everything is in chaos.
Right. Or yeah, now I wanted to put a mountain metaphor in, but metaphors don't really work. But it's, well, like maybe you can stand so far away, right? Because mountains is somehow lifting you up, right? Where you can hold both perspectives, right? You can see the sky and
Yeah.
the ground, but you're not participating, right? Like you're too far
Did you
away.
ever? Ooh, that's really actually strange analysis. Do you ever see Chariot of the Gods, like old hippie movie? It's like a most really famous thing about like aliens being on Earth, yada yada. They go down to Central America near I think Chile or whatever on the Pacific coast of South America, and there's these huge, like hundreds of feet long, sometimes mile long, rows of stones and stuff. And when you're in a helicopter, and you look at them, they're like pictures. But when you're on the ground, on the field, like where they're laying, it's just walls. Like there's no way you can see what it is. In the movie, they make it seem like, how could these people have figured out what's happening? Well, if you take a look at the reality, they're right by the coast. And if you go inland more, there's a really high mountain, like the Andes, where cocaine's from. So like really high mountains. And the people had to coordinate their efforts, literally go on top of a mountain and lay out what it would look like, and then go down on the ground and lay it out. There would be such a disconnect between, even now when they were trying to describe it, they show people these pictures and they make it look like a field, like a big open plain next to the ocean. And they don't show you the mountains right next to it. That would give you the perspective. If you're on the mountain looking down on these things, you see this huge display of art. And you're walking in the field, it's just rows of bricks. And I really think that juxtaposition's required, but sometimes people are stuck. They think that the correct place to be would then be on top of the mountain. Well, you don't live on top of the mountain. You live in the field, sowing and living with your family and doing stuff. Like it's important to go to the mountain, get that perspective, and maybe remember it. But that's not where you live.
It's sacred, right?
Yeah, it's sacred. Exactly. It's you go
Set
there for,
apart from the rest of your life.
you can't do it all day long, man. Like you have very few people are called to live on top of the mountain. That's like a one in a generation or something. So
Yeah, and maybe you don't want to live on the mountain. Does it mean
no,
to live on the
yeah.
mountain?
Altitude sickness is no fun. I don't know if you've ever actually done
Well,
hiking,
it's also like,
but
if you're on the mountain, you can participate with the
can't
people
do
in the
anything.
fields, right?
Exactly. Nothing. And that's exactly where I'm thinking that it's like people now really want to be that smart guy who coordinates the step from the top of the mountain without realizing that person also went
It's
down and picked
lonely.
up rocks and did the, like,
Well, yeah, they
or I,
should, right?
they, man, I really wish I wish people would just work more. Like I get like props for doing like the work I do. And I'm like, I clean toilets and stuff all day. Like literally I clean showers 5 days a week. Like it's not glory. It's, and you get props for stuff, but people don't actually notice this, the sludge, the cleaning out the pipes, the actual work that it takes to do something is not glorious, because you wouldn't want to do that in the most sacred high of high, holy of holies. There's another, I have to go down here to do this. So I think that's definitely a thing. Maybe we need to find a way to, using this mountain metaphor, looking down on stuff, we need to find a way to get people to see that intimacy. When you're way up on top of a mountain with a group of people, it's quite intimate. The people who can make it there. Not everybody can. You know, a lot of people want to. Everybody wants to do that. Not many people have the ability or the commitment to really achieve it. So when you're there around those people who have that tenacity to get where you've gotten, there needs to be, in that head-on collision of differences, to have some mercy, as you mentioned earlier. Like, mercy is going to be key there, because yeah, I've always wondered, like in the Holy of Holies in the Bible, you only get, basically the high priest gets to roll lots, the high priest, and one day of the year they go into the Holy of Holies. It's one person, one day a year, for like a really specific time.
Yeah,
And
sounds like what we have on Princess Star, right? Like one
ah,
time the king, like it's like.
that's right. No, that's right though, because you said he does the purpose. So he does that to the government or to the
Well, no,
people as
the
a
government
whole,
is preparing effectively these sacred documents that are going to be enacted throughout the
and
year.
he does the enacting by reading them and declaring them.
Right, he's bringing them
Okay.
into being because they're secret, right? Like they're sealed before he reaches them, so they always get
Oh.
leaked. But whatever, right? Like
No, but that's so correct with opening the seal. I mean, people don't, they think apocalypse literature bad apocalypse, but it's like, no, that's how the new world starts. There would be a seal open, there would be a trumpet blasted. I bet they blast some sort of a trumpet or something somewhere during the coronation.
well, but also it's also not new, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
it
my wife
has
and
to
I were
be
watching
sealed.
the, yeah, my wife and I were watching the funeral procession of the Queen. And my niece is there. She's like 3, almost 4, coming on 4 soon. And they just didn't understand, because everybody's walking perfectly in sync. And I've been to Scotland and to England and stuff, and got to go to a couple places and see that's what they do. Like when the guys switch at Buckingham Palace or whatever, when the guards switch, they're in meter the whole time. If they have that suit on, they're in meter. So you're looking at this procession and they're going into the gate. So it's leaving the public. The last viewing of the public as the Queen's going into the gate. And then there's like a huge procession of all these people on both sides. Most of them military attire with big hat, but there's also civilians and like family members and dukes and stuff. And even the women who are dressed in like dainty old clothes are perfectly in sync with the step. Everyone on the procession on the Queen's funeral is in step. And my wife just couldn't understand it. She just was like, she thought I was making fun of her or them and got mad at me. She didn't understand when I was like, they do this every day. Like this, if you work at the Buckingham Palace or you work at one of these huge famous things, this institution isn't fake to them. They really do it. They've walked in step every day. Well, here's the day that they're burying their queen. It's a very important time for them. And you can just watch, like, you could either see them like robots, or you could see that they're really in communion and they're taking this serious. Those are the two ways to see it. My wife thought I was making fun of them, and I'm like, no, they really care. They want to show full respect to their queen, the purple pillow with her scepter and their crown. Like, they take that real serious, even if they disagreed with her. It doesn't matter. That has nothing to do with what they're doing right now. And it's weird to see that juxtaposition, because I think a lot of people in our nowadays world, I mean, even if people who live where you are, how many of them understand the basics of like what you were just saying, like the procedure and why they would do that? It's important. It should be taught in school. It should be real.
Well, I actually read an article about how the language that was being used wasn't being able to be understood by like 50% of the population. right?
Oh, so it's so antiquated, it hasn't even kept, it hasn't, does it need to notch up a little bit, but not too much, or what?
Well, so there were arguments, right? Like, so there was two positions, right? Like one is, well,
Very,
you can just dumb it down, but the other
uh-huh.
position was like people don't need to understand it. And I was like, yeah, and people don't
Wow,
need to,
see? That's
right?
like, that's literally, that's Vatican II. That's the argument of Vatican II put in politics. Should we make the mass the traditional mass, or should we make the mass so that everybody understands it? Boom. That's the same argument, but put into a political.
Well, but it's important to realize, right? Like it's going to be on the news, right? But on the news, it's going to be summarized. It's going to be reinterpreted. It's going to be put
Yeah,
in diagrams and graphs and all that stuff, right? So like I kind of agree, right? Like I don't think you need to understand. Like and it's not that when you listen to the thing you don't understand, you can't participate, right? Like it's not that all the words are like completely foreign. It's just like it's it's maybe outside of your zone of proximal development or something.
boom.
All right.
Yeah, way above
Right,
for most.
but in some sense, like that's important to know that there's the higher, right? And
I
that
think
the
so.
higher is benevolent towards you.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
then that also has
that's
to
a
be
great
true.
thing. It's not that it's higher and you don't have access to it. You're welcome to learn this. We want you to know. It's that makes I think you just said that with the word benevolent there. It's like, here's a thing that's above you that's good, but it's going to take care of you even if you don't fully participate. But the more you participate in it, the more good it will be. That's kind of how I see a healthy any government of any level, because they're essentially a monopoly on violence. That's my favorite definition for government. And if you're going to have monopoly on violence, you have to have that grounding in
Yeah, like I like,
I'm doing this.
but I like to reframe it as the embodiment of the ideal, which is like really heresy to say that, right?
Yeah, that's like
But
Hegelian to
that's
the max.
but 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 that's what government should be, right? Like you should
Oh yeah,
govern by
should be.
example, and having the example is
Wow.
the thing that lifts everybody up, right?
Yeah, that's Hegelian to the max. That's very
No, no,
fun.
don't do this.
I know, not on purpose. I'm just saying, like his 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 instantiation of the ideal was the state. I'm just saying it's just, and
No, no,
but I
but
can see
that's not
like
what I'm saying.
I agree, but I'm just saying it's just very interesting to see how that my brain can't help but map on that way of ratcheting
Yeah, but
things.
that's where you
Yeah.
have to go when you're a materialist, right?
Mhm.
So when we were talking earlier about making communism a religion, right? Like yes, communism is a materialist religion,
Yes. Yep. A religion
and
that denies spiritual. Yep.
right, and and so yeah, or at least it admits it or whatever, right? But yeah, um, and yeah, that's really dangerous, right? Because if when we were talking about categories, right, like and how do you what identity do you take if you don't have the spiritual to put the category in, you have to reduce the category to the material, right? And that's the big sin of the 20th century.
Very big one. Well, it has consequences that are too dire to ignore. That's kind of what I see. I see people are getting into relationships with themselves that are transactional. And that's if you're even in that relationship to yourself, then how can you have trust or faith in any other relationship with other people or anything else? So it's like the diet fads or anything, trying to people transacting their wants and desires and doing that calculation back on themselves and not realizing how evil that is. It doesn't have spirit. That's completely a materialist way of viewing the self.
Right, it also doesn't have intimacy,
None. Oh no,
so
there's
there's a lack of intimacy with the self.
I mean, yeah, there's a total that if you don't know, well, that's what I was saying. There's nothing more familiar to you than who you are, but there's also nothing more mysterious and like just ineffable
No,
than
no, I
your.
like
So,
I don't think that matters.
hmm,
I think the intimacy, right, is being in relationship, right? So what's a transaction? Well, a transaction is not a relationship, right? Like it's a sequentializing of
yeah,
interaction.
yeah,
And so getting back to a relationship to yourself, right? Like that requires you to have a different orientation mechanism, right? And what's that orientation mechanism? It's love.
yeah. You can give yourself the benefit of the doubt and do things that aren't rational. 'Cause-
Right, but love also like this is one of the problems that I have when people talk about love, right? Because love requires uh, a poetic, that's the term we use, but it's like a participatory understanding, right? Like it allows you to have a way to intuitively relate to what's going on. And if you don't have that intuition, you can't enact it, right? Like it's just not an option. So it's important when we talk about love that we have to realize that some people don't have the capacity, right? Like they don't have the discernment. They, they just can't go there, and that it's a skill, right? Like it's a way of being that needs to be developed through practice, and that's where I think religion is important, right? Like that allows you to develop that relationship.
yeah, I mean, I would agree. I would just add the word yet. So it's
Oh yeah,
like
yes, sure.
that makes, yeah, because that's what I'm saying. In what you are framing, you're framing out that potential ability to change or grow into it. But from where they're at, they don't see that as any sort of possibility. If
Well,
you think that the world is
but
just
it
material,
also isn't, right? Like that's
exactly from that perspective, it
right,
isn't. It genuinely
right.
serves. Yeah, that's the nihilism that I felt. I was raised in like a very affluent part of the world, and yeah, every problem could be solved with things, and that way of viewing the world is poisonous because it makes everything a transaction, including the relationship you have with yourself. I really think that. I really think it becomes, I need to work this hard so I can do this vacation because I deserve that. And it's like all these weird
Right.
extra layers instead
And
of ever being alive.
I need to get the car so I can score 10 neighbor points and
Yep, yep. I mean, a neighbor, exactly. And that type of,
it's all
well,
calculated planning. Yeah.
but there needs to be, it's not like calculation's all bad, but that it's all calculated. That's the exact phrase. That's like terrifying to me. It is
Well,
all calculated.
well, no, but it's a primacy argument, right? So
Hmm.
what, like you have a telos, right? And then you calculate, right? So you were talking about about the conversation, right? Like it can open the world up, right? But it can also close it down. Well,
Mhm.
why do you want to close things down? Well, if you want to
I have the
manifest
answer.
something, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
I'm thinking if I want to close the conversation down, I want you to agree with me that my answer is right, and then that's going to close down. That's
right,
scary to
but
me.
that's necessary for action, right?
For, oh
Like,
yeah, for, oh yes. But then when
right,
you get to those bigger, it's like breathing in and out. Exactly.
right, right.
Okay. Yeah.
But you need to act, right? And the action is going to give you the participatory
That's,
experience, so that you can go back and open up into the bigger space.
I think that's what I was trying to grasp earlier when I was kind of deeper in thought about some of our past conversations is I think what I can now articulate is you guys really, you and Mark and some of the that little crew, you guys really enjoy the benefits of Philea and Ikea, of having there is definite, it's not like Philea and Ikea is bad. No. You guys really like that. And then someone like me, if I'm doing Philea and Ikea, I like to go into like PhD defense mode. That's how I do Philea and Ikea. I don't have like another setting. I've watched those like my whole life, PhD defenses. So like I love that, where I sound like I'm giving you, like I'm steel manning your argument just to say something at the end that undermines everything. That's what a PhD people do. They are brutal to argue with. And
yeah, but
it's necessary.
But that's not in service to the truth. That's the problem.
There you go. There you go. Good. There. That's better.
Right?
Very often I see that.
If you have Philea and Ikea, like, so the way I see it, right? Like you have this breathing, right? And now we go back to dogma, right? So when you're talking, you're setting up this frame, the framing with the dogma, right? Like the set of agreed presuppositions. And then you can say, well, if we look at the world using these presuppositions, we can see this, right? And we should have agreement about that. Now, then, well, what does that mean? Like, well, I don't know, right? Like that doesn't necessarily have implications because I don't know if that's true, right? Like I don't know if presuppositions are true. But if you're
it's intersubjective truth, that's not objective.
Right, but it's important, right? Like for the intimacy, right? Like that you can see the same space, right? And you can make the same relationships that the other person is making, right? Because now you have like built a ground on which you can start building more, right? And then when you run into a conflict at some point, you can say, well, like maybe 5 layers down, we made an assumption that we shouldn't have made, but you can only go there if you contest the territory, right? Like if you clear the fields and everything is flat. So yeah, that's the Philea and Ikea, and I think it's really important in relation to intimacy that you can have these agreements.
So the Philea and Ikea, I'm gonna ask, would be best served in pursuit of which of these two, the objective truth or the intersubjective truth?
Well, I would.
It doesn't have to be those two. That's my framing. You can go wherever you want. But
no, so I don't like objectivity, right? Because objectivity is presupposing. But you could call it like a logical truth or something, right? So. Well, and okay, so I'm not going to call it truth. I'm going to call it true, right? Like I'm making a distinction between capital T truth, right, which is requires embodiment, right? Like, but there's also true, right, which in some sense doesn't require embodiment.
So it could be embodied. Birds fly.
Right, like that's true, right?
But penguins don't.
But like what does it mean? Birds fly is meaningless, right?
Exactly.
Unless you contextualize it in
penguins don't, and then all of a sudden everything falls. So yeah, that's making more sense to me now.
But yeah, but the point is, birds fly is meaningless because you can't implement it, right? So it's not capital T truth, right? Capital T truth has to be filtered through your ethical system, right? Like you have a frame and you say, well, if I accept this frame through my ethical.
Yeah. So that's why you can have a truth or a small true thing that is not good or beautiful, but something that is truth would have to have goodness and beauty in it. That makes so much more sense to me.
Right.
Why you could have the possibility for both.
Right.
It's not a logical trap to be in.
Yeah, and you can map them on heaven and earth, right? So there's truth in heaven, which is capital T truth, and you have truth on earth, which is effectively a fact or something, right?
Yeah.
But that facts don't tell you, right? Like, this is where we have the Izot gap as well. right? Like, and then
Mhm.
we're the mediator between those two.
Well,
And people can't make that distinction, right? Because like whenever I talk to people, right, like they always make inferences, right? Like because yeah, well that's natural, right? Like what does this thing mean to me? Well, it's like I'm not talking about what it means, right? Like we first have to establish that we're talking about the same thing.
yeah,
And if
that's like Paul mentioning the word container. It's like you're not talking about Tupperware. When you hear container, you are talking about the very abstract concept. You are not talking about a container that contains things. You're talking about a
well, I'm talking about that which contains, right? The
yes, which is like a
capital
very
T version.
meta. That's my point. It's like a so okay. Hmm. Well then, where so on a kind of a this corner of the internet lingo, where can we notice the intimacy crisis and do something about it? Where because from my opinion, this is where I was gonna kind of tie this back is I go to my town hall, I know my mayor and all my politicians in my state, all these things started to ripple effect and like all the kids, all my cousins and nieces and nephews and stuff are being affected by these terrible things. So I'm now on things that influence that. Like I went and joined that. I now have to talk at town hall and I have to do all these things. So that's where I'm being intimate because like I'm
Mhm.
that. What arena, agent arena relationships or what type of things can we do to open people up to be confident to actually be intimate and put skin in the game and get things done? Because
Well,
discussing things versus doing things is where it's where that gap that is at really is. And someone like you, like I can remember talking to you a long time ago. Like I joined the Discord like week 4 or 5 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is when I like got my first Discord thing and was like, what's going on? Like I'm on the portal group in craft, but I don't know what's going on. It's not my lingo. And I've seen a whole lot of change in quite a few people. And that's definitely from you not just sitting here all day. That's from you actually going into the real world and giving a shit. So how do we bridge that? How do we get people to go into the world where it's intimate and actually real, not just um,
well,
close to them
there's
in their head?
well, there's two things, right? Like you can do that on the internet, right? Like when I'm talking about these wires, right, with a couple wires in the
Mhm.
beams, right? You like in some sense that's a muscle, right? Like you can grow your
Mhm.
capacity for connectivity, and the internet facilitates a subset of these connections, right? Like it facilitates, and so and I think especially for people who have a shyness in their human interaction, their the fact that they're on the internet affords them the distance, right? Like you were talking about closeness, and that's why I went into the closeness. I think some people require the not closeness in order for them to have the security to make the connection, right? To get into
Hmm.
contact with the other person. So like I do feel like there is a place for the internet in this. Well, so now you say, well, I go into the world because I'm affected, right? Like I'm connected to these issues, right? So well, what is that? Well, there's a telos, right? Like there's a purpose in what you're doing, right? Like there's a way in which you're affected, and you have skin in the game. And so I heard Vervaeke talk about this, I think, where it's like, well, uh, failure has to matter, right?
Yes.
But I'm like, well, that's a negative formulation, right? You can also say success has to matter. right? Which is a different type of motivation, right? Like the one is running away and the other one is walking toward.
Okay. So yeah, when in that he's usually talking about scientific that method and how it interacts with the flow state.
Right.
So that's like a good way to get truth. But now I see what you're saying, where
but because
kind
you
of like
can't measure success, right? Like you can only measure failure, and
yep.
and because success is a communion with the ideal, effective, right? Which kind of is what the flow state is, right? Like the flow
Yeah, but
state
you
is,
can't measure that. That's what's awesome. I run a homeless place, and when people ask me for, how many people are successes, I don't answer that question now. That's like one of my big trigger questions. Like, what's your success rate? I'm like, it's not a thing. Like, I can tell you how many people have killed themselves since I met them. Like, that's my failure rate. I can measure that. I can't measure my success rate. I can tell you the fatality rate. That's my failures. And that's real. Like, so it's really hard to sell some. Well, think of how hard it will be to sell someone on the good then, right? I can measure.
You can't.
You can't.
But the good is self-evident. It sells itself.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, yeah.
You have to just manifest it and shine bright, I guess.
Right. But to go back, right? Like so what are all these groups of people on the internet that pop up, right? Like most of them are reactionary, right? Like they're identify against, right?
Yep.
Which is, well, it's like, oh, how could America unite? Well, when they're at war, right? But that's also identification against, right? Like that's
Yeah,
not
the
a
call for unity
sustainable.
from Biden was everybody who's MAGA is against us. We need to unite against them. It's like,
right.
What the fuck did you just say? That is
right.
What?
I don't have anything good to offer. Get to me because I'm delivering you from evil, whatever. But
yeah,
but so it's really important that you give some people, right, like this, an access to this ideal, right? And you do have to manifest it, right? And you do have to have a relationship, and I think that was the estuary idea, right? But I don't think the estuary idea is concrete enough, right? Like it's not substantial, right? Like and so you can look at people from different stages, right? Like we talked about before. Some people don't have the capacity for love, like they just don't have it. Well, capacity for, when I say capacity, is the ability to act in right now, right? Like I make a distinction between transformative and linear progression, right? So if they're linearly progressing, they're never going to get there. You need to have a transformation in order
yep.
to achieve that, right? And so you first have to get people into a space where they're capable. Well, they want to commit to that space, and they're capable of having this transformation, right? And then when they're transformed, then they have a tool set that they can accept back into the world, right? And as you were talking about skin in the game, right? Like when these points go hot, right? And like I've got a lot of criticism, right? Because like I in my relationships, like I dance on that line, right? It's like, well, like I feel like there's something wrong here, right? Like you should watch into that darkness, right? And sometimes people are like so freaked out that they just run away, right? And it's like, well, yeah, you're not being nice. And like, well, but they're gonna have to look into the darkness, right? And they're gonna have to know that there is darkness, because they don't know, then they're just gonna bump into the wall over and over and over. So, yeah. So how do we get? So I think that's what we need, right? We need a way to get people into the tool set, and then back into the world, into community, right? So when I came into the church for the first time, I'm like, what the heck is going on here? What are they using all these words for, right? Like it's like glory and honor and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I know these words, but I don't, right? And I still feel I don't know them, but I know how I don't know them now, right?
Yeah.
So there's a participatory experiential aspect that's just lacking, right? And I'm gonna have to cultivate that over time. And I think in some sense, what Christianity has done is defined a couple of axes of relationship, right? And saying, well, these are essential, right? Like these are but that by which things manifest,
Yeah.
and they're all coming from the same source. So have a relationship with that source through these things, and then you can have a relationship to other things as well, right? And now you can have right relationship, right? Like I think the idea of having right relationship is, well, you have to have relationship in the right ways. And like, how do you discern which ways are correct? Is your transactional relationship the right way? Because it might really seem so if you want to rationalize it from a certain perspective. That's completely true, right? So now we're in an ethical space. Like, what are we? How are we privileging how we're relating? Well, and Christian answer is love. But then the question is, well, what is love? Well, you need to learn what it is.
Hmm. Yeah. It's weird. It's like if I'm convinced I'm an it, I'm not a thou. I'm not a thing that has glory. I'm not a thing that has any of those words that you kind of know, but you don't really know. Like if that is what God is and I made in that image, but I don't even really know those words that I'm using to describe the thing who's who's I'm the image of, then maybe I need to focus on understanding what those words are. Maybe I do have glory. I don't know how much, maybe just a smidge, but I think that's gonna a good step for me to kind of see, because the abstraction versus that instantiation, I see it too often. There's no contact between them, and that's really what I want to find is a way to.
Well, it's unearned wisdom, right? It's like,
Oh yeah.
oh, I'm operating in this space that I can't operate. Like, you're like, good luck. It's role playing. And I think that's what
Well,
imposter syndrome is, right? Like, imposter
hmm,
syndrome is kind of like, oh yeah, you're operating in this space, but you don't have the participatory understanding to
I get
unlock
that
it.
sometimes when I'm in the work field where I have like one of the ladies I work with, she's been in the mental health field for 43 years, 44 years almost. And like I'm 30. So she has like almost 15 more years experience in the work field that we're in than I have years life. And her and I don't get along very well, but professionally we're a really good team because I have such a different personality than Kathy that like if one of us figures out someone's up to something and we both agree, you're done for, because we have like such radically different her level of experience, she gets it. And then I have this like abstract, like I'm a sleuth, I can't help my nature. And so um I really think that that's important to find, and recognize that you do have something there. As much as you're supposed to conform, you're like participate and conform with other, there is something that is you still that you need to hold on to. And I think that's really difficult right now. That's where I see that hang
Well,
up earlier.
what do you mean? Like I'm
Well,
getting
it's like,
skeptical.
yeah, well, that's why that flip earlier you made was so interesting to me with the how other people can kind of take that logic and then move it back on itself. So if I'm so completely malleable, so that's where I'm scared is I
No,
do
no,
want to
but you're
somehow
not,
keep my distinction. Yeah, but
because
I want to.
because you're orienting towards God, not towards people.
Mhm. Okay, so maybe that's what other people are doing. Maybe the major issue of like the zombies are people trying to orient to other people, to that
Right.
smoothness of other people. They have no interest in the actually orienting towards that higher or deeper or more
Well,
real
they
thing.
can't,
They like that.
right? They can't see it.
Well, true. Oh yeah, if everything is painted over with a nice shine,
Right.
sheen, why would I
And,
why would I
right,
suspect?
well, they don't have to, right? And it sucks, right? So,
Hmm.
and there's well, there's when you're at work, right? And someone says, go clean the toilets, right? And you can say, fuck you, asshole, whatever, right? In your mind, and say,
Hmm.
well, I gotta pay the bills, so I'll do it, right? Or you can do it with joy,
Yeah.
right? You can
Yeah.
participate in
My nickname at the martial arts studio was Cinderella, and it's because every time something broke or got hurt or whatever, or someone made a mess, I was the first one in the closet getting the stuff to go clean it, to the cellar, to the attic. And it's like, it bugged me for like a day or two, and then I realized no one else can do that, and then I like owned it. And like, I don't mind being called Cinderella when I'm training because no one else has the balls to do what I do. And like, it was me taking on that exact charge of being like, well, I guess no one wants to go, so and so just got
but
his
no,
nose broken and
but
bled all over. No
that's
one
not
wants
even a
to.
positive, right? Like because it's like, well, this has to be done, but you can also say, no, I'm participating towards
Hmm.
the good,
Yeah,
right? And I don't think other people have that option, right? Because
that sucks.
they don't know, they don't have a relationship to the good, right? Like they don't see it, right? Like there's this view from above, right? And it's like, well, if I'm always standing in the field, how can I see the pattern that I'm relating to?
Yep.
Like it's
Yeah,
not an
they don't
option.
have that. That's really weird to me. So that's what I mean is like, they're convinced that they're not that's what I was trying to say a moment ago, is a very common glitch in people who are very mentally unstable right now would be something like, they're convinced there isn't an essence of themselves, so that they just need to conform to what is. And that will, in that process, they're going to lose anything of themselves they should keep. Like, most of you needs to go away. I get that. But there is something that each of us is made individually. We're not supposed to all work and become
Yeah, but
carbon
okay,
copies of Christ.
but Skyler, okay, here we go. Because I feel like you're holding on to something, and
Uh-oh.
and what if you can't lose that?
If you can't lose it,
Yeah,
like, even if you're trying your best, and that's probably what the glitch is right now. Because I mean, I see people with such a weak sense of identity that they're changing to whatever the moment is,
right.
justifies their existence.
Like I think that movement is correct. Right? Like that's what the Eastern people are talking about, right? But you need to do that movement in a container, right? But the container isn't you.
Okay. So maybe, okay. Maybe I'm gonna have to use a little bit of trigger word, but not too bad. So if I have a globalist perspective, so here I am. I'm someone who said that there's only one type of person, in my opinion. I think we're all made in the image of Christ. However, when I go to relate to people, I can't just relate to person. It's too much. There's too many people. There's too many context. And so what I have is my nation or my whatever. It's in between. It's not all the way up, but it's not me. It's above me, but it's
No, no,
not very high up.
it's but yeah, but in some sense you can talk about it differently, right? You don't relate to people, you relate to a telos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now the telos is saying, well, in order to, right? So you were talking about categories, natural categories, right? Well, if I want to have a relationship to the dog, right? The dog is a natural category for me, right? Like, and it doesn't
Dog.
matter whether I call a dog or blah, 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 right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like that, it's all the same because what I need to relate to doesn't change depending on the label that I use. right? So the telos is defining the label, right? So when the telos is here, then all these other people, they have an identity in relation to the telos, right? And that identity might be political, right? But it might also not be a political. And if you assign a political identity to a non-political relationship, then you get into issue, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. Like we don't have the discernment about what the other person's relationship is to the telos, or what our relationship is to the telos.
Okay, so what's popping in my head now is like Greece, ancient Greece. You basically have 13 city-states that are always at war with each other unless anybody else fights them. Then they all stop what they're doing, team up, and wipe out whoever is picking a fight on them. That sounds correct to me all of a sudden with what you were just saying. Each of, like, Athens is fighting for the identity of Athena.
Right.
That's who they are. They are members of the body of Athena. That's what it means to be a member of Athens.
But they're also the member of the body of Greece.
But they're also exactly. So that's interesting to me. And that's why Zeus's daughter is Athena and blah, blah, blah. So, okay. Well, that just gives like a great narrative explanation. And then what I see our culture is essentially doing is reverting back to like Roman levels of paganisy, where we're just, they make everything equivocal. Oh, your sun god and our sun god? Okay, Apollo Ra. Is Apollo Ra? No. But they're both sun gods, so we're just gonna say Apollo Ra. And it's like that inconsistency, or that mixing is what I see as, we think we're saying the same thing and we're not.
But yeah, but you can, oh yeah, I like that, right? Like so yes, right? Like this is the criticism that I have, right? Like Vervaeke's good and the Christian good are not the same good. Like they're not.
They're close, they're platonic. That's why they can agree, but it's not the same.
Right. and so yeah, that's really important, and you can see it in the Trojan War, right? So where the gods they flip, right? Like there's a bunch of gods that's like, oh, I'll just go there, and now I'm like, yeah, that person pissed me off, so I'm gonna flip sides.
I'm gonna go save Paris this time. You know, he's about to get crushed by Ajax. Nope, I'll just pick him up.
And that's happened. But what is that? Well, that's chaos, right? like now there's no like there's no integrity in the structure anymore, because we don't have persistent categories, because they're not transfixed on the ideal, right? Like they're transfixed on local idolatrous instantiation.
Completely local instantiation. That's why I like the bigger patterns, where it's like the 12 houses, these basic things they're such big patterns that people don't even know that they're participating in. Like the best example I have for showing that the zodiac is the thing that our ancestors knew about, is just the Pentagon of the United States. So that's the military building, and it's a pentagon. A pentagon is a pentagram with the arms taken off. And the United States Pentagon is pointed due north at the North Star Thuban, not the real North Star. That's the North Star from 6,000 years ago when Egypt was taking over the world. It's the eye of the Drake, the basilisk of war. And it's like, even our house of war, where the most serious killings on the planet are organized and prepared, is the United States Pentagon, and they are pointed at that North Star from 6,000 years ago. Not magnetic north, not. Why would they do that? Is it a glitch? Or it's like, no, this stuff's real, and it's really scary too when people see that there's these huge patterns you can participate in. And sometimes the container can be adjusted and moved a little, but there's actually, you're in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. That's not just some hippie song. It's like, we were in Pisces and now we're going into Aquarius. It's like, that's actually what's happening. It just sounds crazy. It sounds like hippie mumbo jumbo.
Well, it also is hippie.
It is hippie mumbo jumbo. I'm not saying it's not hippie mumbo jumbo. I'm just saying it's not just and be mumbo jumbo.
And
There's a little. It's like watching Sam Harris and Peterson discuss. I'm using Peterson's argument. He's like, you think that this grand procession that has held humanity together for tens of thousands of years is just arbitrary? Like, you're dumb if you think that. Now, if you think that reading your horoscope is going to help you find your, like, then you're also dumb. So it's not it's not like one or the other. It's just like, obviously, if this makes sense at all, it must be on to something.
well,
And
but in some sense, reading your horoscope is going to help you.
because
because it's going to motivate you to action, and action is always
exactly.
better than inaction. So it's like,
Yeah, that's where materialist brain in my head goes, oh, it's just the placebo effect. All this stuff I'm doing is just placebo effect. And I'm just obfuscating myself enough to not really recognize it. And I hope that's wrong, because that's my biggest fear
well,
in
but
life.
like, so what does it matter whether it's placebo effect or not? I'm confused.
Because I don't want it to be a thing that can be procedurally gamed. If it is just
No, but
that,
you
then
can't.
it's,
Like that's
I hope.
well, no, but that's where Nietzsche and stuff, right? Like the will of the power doesn't work,
True. I mean,
right? Like you need to surrender to God, right? Like the surrendering, the giving over of authority is essential for true transformation. So you can say all you want, right? Like either you're in right relationship, right, which means you surrendered, right? Because that means that you don't decide, right, or you're not. And I don't see a way out. Like I think it's just
that
that
just makes me scared, because I've talked to enough Muslims, and that's the exact argument they gave me for Allah. Because Allah basically just requires submission, and if you're not submitting, then you are not in right relation, and therefore you should not be. And that's like really scary, because that's not what you're saying, because you want people to be able to fall into right relation, right? It's like it's kind of what my question was earlier, is what
yeah,
do we do to get people to change?
but this is where sin is important, right? And original sin is important. Like, yes, we're sinners, right? Like we're not in right relationship, right? Like we're not in the garden. Like that's not a place that we might have temporal participation in the garden, but we're not there. Like that's not where we live. We also don't live up the mountain, right? Which is maybe the place where the garden is, right? So so it yes, right? Like if you're not in right relationship with God, right? Like you're a sinner, but there's grace, right? Like there's mercy, and and you and there's love, right? And like if you don't have these things, like I don't I don't think there's any Muslim that perfectly does the thing, right?
No,
like
I don't think there's anybody perfectly doing the thing. So
right.
it's just that argument is what I'm saying, is like, when I've talked to someone who really believes, who's
but
like
that's the
trying
Pharisees
their
as
best to
well,
help
right?
me. Hmm?
Yeah.
Yeah, every one of us needs to follow the rules so that the thing will happen. And it's like, well,
but
people can't.
we
Yeah,
do
but
need to
well,
follow the rules, but the
oh yeah.
rules are pointing at the spirit, right? And the rules are the thing that allows us to capture the spirit, right? And this is why we need leaders, right? Like we need the people to go up the mountain to commune with the spirit, and then they go down and they go acting out the spirit, and everybody goes right, and they don't know, right? Like they have to obey
Hmm.
because they can't, because that else it's not function, right? Like so the shepherd needs to lead the flock, right? Like the flock doesn't know where to go graze next, especially not when there's grazing contracts and whatever, right? Like the flock can't navigate grazing contracts, and they shouldn't. Like that, like it's not good for everybody to participate on that level because it's not functional. Like they don't need to.
Hmm. Well, I've never been more convinced that, even though I'm disagree with Catholics pretty much outright, that Latin Mass makes sense. And it's weird how that you proved that to me in like a most roundabout, not on purpose way. But like sometimes it should call. It's like they're not telling you you can't participate. They're just saying you're not yet. It's kind of like really putting that out on the other person. This is an option. If you want to show up your town hall, you can show up to your town hall and start doing things that change your town, like probably twice a month. So that's a real thing. But then calling and actually doing that and having the bravery to take your 3 minutes and have everything written down so you don't mess around with your 3 minutes, you can say what you need to say. That's really tough. And
Well, well, like
I
this
want to
goes
find more
back.
shepherds.
Yeah, well, but this also goes into the honor of the wisdom, right? So, what if you're participating in the ritual every week, right? And you have participatory understanding, right?
Mhm.
And then the participatory understanding slowly reveals the mystery that's hidden within the Latin words, right? But the Latin words are not something you have access to because you don't have the book, right? Like you can't even read, right? But but there's intelligibility that is literally revealed, right? Like if we're talking about revelation, right? Like an actual spiritual experience, right? Like in some ways, I think that's the right way. Like we're trying to invert that now with all the psychedelics and oh, like if I read all the pluralistic traditions and like all the
Hmm.
15,000 Protestant theologies, and it's like no, like you like I'm in church and I walk around and I see these people participate and I'm like I can't go there, right? Like it's just alien, right? Like I have my own wacky reconstruction that came from the wrong way, right? Like I I climbed the mountain and I was like, oh, look at what those people are doing there. Maybe I should go back down and participate. Instead of participate, I was like, well, maybe you should go up the mountain sometime, right? It's
Yep.
like, no, I did it the
Yeah.
wrong way, and I'm gonna be paying for that the rest of my life, right? And I think you have the same issue, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
I think a lot of people here do what you just said with that, looking around when all the kids were playing sports when I was a kid, and I just didn't understand the idea of the team. Like it just didn't click. They'd hand me the football and I'd be like, okay, so that you want me to get this football over there? Okay, I can do that. And I was like really good at the sport, but I was like the worst team player. I was I was the worst. The only team player role they ever gave me was point guard in basketball because nobody could tell what I was going to do. So I just was like erratic, and I'm impossible to be. If I'm the guy bouncing the ball, deciding where it's getting ready to go, you're about to get messed with. Like, and I felt like an alien. Like all the other kids, they just fell right in. Oh, we're picking up the thing and doing this thing, and all the kids just did it, and I'm sitting there like, where do I stand? Like I don't get where I'm supposed to be, and I don't see where I plug in. I feel like I'm supposed to be outside looking at it, and yeah, that's a very, very disheartening move to see that more and more people are falling into that pattern where it's like I would do anything to not be like this, and here I am like watching our world get trained to stand back and just take a dump on things and like disregard them and without ever participating or see their value.
right. And then sitting in their own shit.
And that's all that's left. You don't have anything. Yeah, that's they don't have anything else but that. So yeah, I mean, it's just tragic. Well, I think that little explanation you just had helped me out quite a bit because that's definitely how I've seen things. Is kind of like from my observer room. One of my nephew who's had a bunch of brain surgeries. He's 3 years younger than me, and one of my first memories is when he was just under 5. He had his biggest brain surgery, and I got to be on like the second row with a big window, and it's like a bunch of people looking down on the operating room, and like literally like they're just taking out his skull, and like there's his brain. And being like 8 years old or something and looking at my nephew's brain and realizing like, oh, I have a brain too, and like that really grounded me in a way. And then they also took his speech, so my nephew can't talk, and like just how that would how it changes the world he gets to be part of. You know, he was prom king, nicest kid, everybody loves him, and he can't even say hi or anything other than hi, really basic one syllable words. So it's such a difficult thing for me to see an entire culture of people going through very played out, not good things, and we're just like allowing it to happen, allowing people to have this like critical take a view from beside a thing without participating on it and thinking that they actually have know anything about it.
Well, yeah, well, and even worse, right? Like the the 'cause what was Fafeki was talking about this, right? Like yeah, that's a participatory description, but I don't want a participatory description. I want a functional description. I'm like, no, like I don't.
Oh, okay. The
It's
yeah,
like because it's like, well, I don't want to know what it's like to be like that. I want to know what it's like to look at. I was like, why do you care what it's like to look at it? Just
yeah,
participate in the damn thing and be happy.
yeah. That's the trap I think him and I are in. That hopefully I'm young enough that I can get out of it in time. Because yeah, that's like the self-critical. That's what someone who does doctoral defenses would think. Like that's unable to ever stop, and that's terrifying though.
Well,
Like,
that's what I did in church the first 3 months. It's like, shut up, brain. Shut up, brain. Shut up,
shut
brain.
up, Brian. Yep.
It's nope. I'm not here to understand. And I still have it, right? Like you're saying this. What does that mean? And I'm like, I'm trying to not get into to the words, but I'm trying to get into the platonic form. It's like, oh, okay, like that's the shape, and like that's the relationship, and like that's real hard. So I guess I want to get into your platonic form a little bit. So I think we kind of drew a line through your life.
Yeah, not very well. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Like, I guess we'll get a lot of comments about about this. So, so, yeah. There's this observer stance indeed, right? Where that's blocking the intimacy, right? And maybe that's the closeness, right? So the
Well, you said
close.
earlier, you made this point that I'm really trying to figure out right now, which is for some people, for them to get that contact or something, they need that distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to steelman that because I there's something there. Maybe not for me, but I can recognize
Well,
what it's talking about.
so if you're hurt, right? If you're injured, right? Especially, well, you've had those experiences, right? You had some people that supposed to take care of you betray you, right? So now when you get into a relationship like that, right, and that gets triggered, right, like that creates not so much distance, but it creates a wall, right? Like there's a defense mechanism, and I think your defense mechanism is probably skepticism, right? So
Oh yeah,
so so oh, like I'm just gonna be in this ironic relationship, and now you can't touch me, can't touch me, dude.
exactly. It's the whole move
Well,
it away, that one step, and then you don't have to actually.
right, but at that point, I can't have an intimate relationship.
Yeah, it's completely deadening. It's like that one move I'm trying to remember who was talking about it, because they literally said it's like they're just taking it. I think it is Pajot talking to someone like years ago. He's talking about that perspective. It's like, just take a stand back, or James Lindsay's mentioned it too, where it's like the critical view of things, like the technical, like critical, like CRT type critical analysis of something, is to always critique it, to never, you never participate in that thing. That's not even an option. It's not they have no interest in that. They have an interest in standing apart from it, and
being safe.
yeah, completely.
And that's what your brother did, right? Like, oh, I stand apart and therefore I'm safe.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and there's many ways, right? So one another way is escape, right? Like, so there's a way where you reframe what's going on, right? So you effectively create an illusion, and that allows you to maintain participation, right? Like skepticism, right? Also allows you to maintain participation, right? Like, so if you're in situations where you feel the need to remain functional, right? Like the ability to maintain participation but not be in connectedness is really valuable, right? But there's also other ways, right? Like there's people that get lost in their emotions, right? Like, and they become non-functional. And you can have that either extroverted, right, in aggression, or you can have that introverted in despair, effectively, right, and anxiety, and and I think there's also a neutral relationship where you just ignore it, like you just not tuned into the wavelength, and you're just participating in parts that you can be participating in, but at that point, right, like you're blind, right? Like in some
Yeah,
sense,
that's like a zombie. That's like blind sight, numb touch, deaf hearing. That's, you're just going through the world, but you're not really there.
right.
That's where I lived for a while. That's why I can recognize it. That's my answer to nihilism, was to just go into a very shitty Western reading of non-action. And then I was like, all right, wherever the chips fall, I don't care. If someone wants to try to fight with me, they'll come in here and start a fight with me. Like, and totally didn't help my mind state at all, because I was basically a zombie,
Mm-hmm.
like very unconscious of what I was doing, like
But
on purpose though, like consciously trying to be unconscious of what I'm doing, so I didn't have to take any reaction or anything to it.
so to go back to the distance, right? So, well, I can just go personal, right? Like, so when I started on the Discord like 3 years ago, I was still heavily uh, burdened by depression, and just the fact that I have this disconnect button gives me the
Mhm.
safety, right? And it's not like, oh, I'm in the city and I need to go home for 15 minutes or half an hour, right? Because if you've effectively have a panic attack, right? Taking that panic attack with you on the bike, right? That's not cool, right? So, but if you have that and you can just shove yourself in bed and curl up in a ball, that's less threatening, right? So that and so I don't want to talk about that specifically, but I want to talk about that that sort of Damocles, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna
Mhm.
be knocked out effectively is no longer having the same weight, right? Because and the fact that it's no longer having the same weight allows this space, right? Like now you can be more daring, right? You can take up upon you more of a burden because the consequence of failure is less, and that's what I'm
That's
talking about.
okay. Now that makes sense to earlier. Now it makes a lot more sense. So that's why maybe what we can do in this is remind, or that cost of failure is so scary that we forget the reward of the achievement, the actual.
Well, I
So
can make it even better for you. What do you mean reward? There's no reward.
well, yeah, I mean,
Like, are we
the
depressed or are
movement
we
towards it.
depressed? Like, there's no reward. You can't see the reward. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have a relationship to it. You don't have
Yeah,
gratitude.
there
You
isn't.
don't have anything.
Yeah.
Like, you're just doing it on faith.
Probably that's why we need examples then. That's why you need those shepherds. You need to submit and realize you're a sheep and you don't know what you're doing.
Well,
I'll just keep an eye on the shepherd and take where he's going for a while.
but you
That's
can
terrifying,
participate
but
in the
yeah.
spirit, right? Like, if the shepherd creates the spirit and you participate in the spirit and you don't feel shit, right? Like, that's not really a reward, but it's not being in the hellhole, right? Like not being punished isn't a reward, right? Like that that the framing doesn't, like, you can frame it like that, but that requires a whole lot of humility, right? It's like,
Extra stops.
thank
Yeah.
you, master, for not punishing me, right? Like, it's
Yep.
like that's the right position you need to get in
Well,
at
I
some
mean,
point. It's like,
as someone who understands that engineering, that's what abusers will do, is they'll like torture their victim and stuff, and let them get a breather and ask if they'd like a cup of water, and then let them have like a couple sips of water, just so they can go, oh, that hope you have right now, I love to give it to you so I can take it again. That's how you know you're up against someone who's like genuinely evil. Like, that's a thing. That's why hope to me is not always a good thing. Like, I've weaponized hope against people I don't like. God forgive me, because I was a very bad person and I knew how to take those things that were very good and like completely undo them. So that's very insightful for me to why it is that that particular framing of the cost of failure has to be real. Why there needs to be mercy in that system now makes sense to me much more clearly, because someone in that system only sees failure. They don't even know there isn't another frame. So like, you're so above and beyond when you're talking like that it's not helping the person who's on the ground in the field. Like, they don't know a mountaintop. There's clouds there. There's not a mountaintop. The mountain goes forever. What are you talking about? They don't
well,
understand.
so that's one of the things, right, that I try to do. It's like, no, there is a mountain, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that you can go there, but I need
Yes,
you to acknowledge that the mountain is there,
it's real.
right?
Yeah, and
And
you can pretend you're there. You can put your conscious, even if you can't get there, you can take the perspective of being there, and that opens up the world. That really does.
well, but it's also a judge, right? Because
Oh,
if it's there, then you're not
yeah.
there, right?
What have you been doing with yourself, you loser? Exactly. That's like a huge judge.
But so yeah, and so the problem that I run into when I talk to people is that they're they're making the connection to themselves, right? Like, oh, so you're saying I'm not there, or you're saying I should be there. It's like, no,
Mm,
I'm not saying that, right? I'm trying to get you
yep.
to acknowledge reality,
Yeah.
and then you can start growing. Like, if you don't know where the good is, you can start climbing all you want. If you're on the wrong mountain, you're fucking screwed.
Yep.
Right? You
Yep.
can go back down again and then you can go up. It's like, don't do that to yourself.
Especially when you have people trying to help. That's the other thing is, um, I I remember like my sophomore year, I was in a really weird class, and she asked us, like, when I was cheesy, she clearly had a hangover or something, so the teacher just asked us like a made up assignment. She asked us like, what would be your superpower? And I was like, to be able to take advice. That was my superpower. I was like, I'd be invincible, like no one would be able to stop me. Literally, if I could actually take advice from other people, I'd be the most insane powerful thing ever. So um
Yeah,
hmm,
I remember, like, I was here and I was having this conversation and with someone who was supposed to aid me. They said, "Well, I know you don't feel as a success when you did that, but do you understand that other people do feel that that's good, that they have a positive experience?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do." Like, but I'm not there, right?
I'm just
So,
not them. That's not my yeah.
so it's like, well, can you tell me how to get there? And the answer was no. And I'm like, why are you bringing it up? I
Yeah,
was
like
like,
it's I really wish I cared about those things. Like I'm really bad. Like I can take someone's good day and make it worse. And that's really something I hate about myself. Like if I am not in the mood, I just won't show up to the thing you invited me to. And that's better than me showing up
"Hmm,
if I'm not in the right mood. I know me and I'll do that. And
well, that's how I feel with relationships, dude.
that's really important, man. That's like
It's like, oh,
really
maybe you don't
important.
want to have a relationship with me right now because I'm gonna mess you up."
Yes. Are you yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we need more honesty between things like that because I love telling when people ask me how my day is, I always tell them how my day is. And when I'm like the worst, like I never say like good unless it's going good. And hmm,
So when I go to church, I had a big issue with this, right? But when I go to church, at a certain point, when I ask you how you're doing, you should answer with, "I'm blessed, highly favored." And I was like,
that's not yeah, it's difficult to understand why. I agree now, but that's taken me a long time to understand.
right. But like I can sometimes say that now, right? Not because I feel blessed and highly favored, but
Oh, but
because I
because
can
you
take the perspective of, oh, things could be way worse,
way worse.
and I'm actually on a path, and like the fact that I'm on that path,
Yes.
I should be grateful for, right?
That's dude, yeah. I could so basically that lesson is what my reverend beat into my head. He's like, yeah, you're like a total jerk. You're an island. Like you have but you're still in the
I
top
had a
1% of, yeah, you are in the top 1% of most educated people to ever live in existence. There's never, and like he just laid it on me and like, he didn't tell me my privilege. He told me like genuinely what I have. And he was like, how dare you not be grateful for that? And I'm like, damn it. Like, it's so true that you can't not genuinely, there's no way to rationalize around if you're able to say those words, then they're true. It's that simple. Like
right,
that's
but
pretty
you can't
brutal.
look at yourself that way. And why can't you look at yourself that way? Because what are you looking at? Right? You're looking at Earth. It's like, oh, I have another shitty day, right? And well, but it's important, right? Like that's the thing, right? Like we should look at heaven and live on Earth. Yeah, and that's real hard. So yeah,
Hmm.
like there's different scarcities, right? And what is a scarcity? Well, a scarcity is a lack of connecting in some sense, right? It's like it's a lack of your ability to have an intimate relationship because something is withdrawn from you, right? And then, well, are you going to live in a way that what is withdrawn is going to be returned to you? And maybe if you have been a good person in the meantime, it's going to be returned to you tenfold.
Yeah, scarcity is what I was trying to think about earlier with the bountiful, like I think we're called to live. Anybody who has the ability to say that response that you mentioned, I'm blessed and well favored, then they should know not only that it can get so much worse, but that they can in some way prevent that. And that's what they're called to do. I think that's why, like, one of the tougher guys in my town right now, Griff, he doesn't like whenever he asks me how I'm doing, I always say good. Because he like gave me crap essentially one day for not saying that my day is doing good. He's like, well, you're out doing the Lord's work, you're doing this. If you showed up here, like he laid into me and he was like kind of tongue in cheek, but he was being serious enough that I couldn't take it like a joke, like only an old guy can talk to you kind of in between, kind of tongue in cheek, but also like dead serious about everything he's saying. And he was like, basically like, don't tell me you're not doing good because you're out participating and you're not just laying in bed right now. And man, that's really hurtful to stay grateful, like, or difficult and hard in like the most genuine sense to stay grateful. So I think that's what I'm gonna try to aim for, especially now that I see what you're aiming about with the people who have lived in punishment don't know what a reward is. So you can't sell them on the reward. That's not a thing. It's genuinely just
my parents tried to reward me. I was like, well, whatever. Like, I won't do the thing that you want me to do because I don't care about the reward.
Yeah.
like, nope, I'm not gonna play your game. Like, whatever.
Just out of defiance. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. If you're willing to give it to me, it must not be that good. That was my thought process behind that.
No,
I thought
no,
everybody was really selfish.
no, but like in some sense, I've always looked to him, right? So I'm like I don't need to reward, right? Like, what you're asking of me is a corruption of my integrity in some way, right? Whether it's imagined or not, is a different.
Yeah, that's why I work on salary. That glitch in me is why I work for salary right now. And it's like I work 60 to 80 hours a week and I'm paid 40 hours a week standard. Never get overtime or nothing. And it's because of that like thing in the back of my head thinking, oh, you just want to, oh, now you think I have to do this. And it's like, I think I found a way around that for myself for now with my employment, but most of my life that's been a big issue with that transaction. I think that's baked into the deal when it's not always. Well, I'm starting to kind of like get spent. I'm thinking.
Well, I want to point the arrows at the future. So you already went there a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So I usually go, well, where are you in 5 years, right? Like when you're manifesting these things, right? Like
yeah. What I'm up to right now is, sadly, I've gotten a bunch more responsibility in my state because I kept on showing up to meetings and stuff. And so now I want to,
well,
like,
idealize it in context of intimacy, right?
Yeah. So I basically I want what the integration of my state's healthcare and mental health care. Right now, everybody feels like it's like a robot thing. And I'm now the trainer for all the people who actually run all those places. To me, it's like it's Sarah from this place and Tony over here. It's not just this corporation or whatever. It's like a group of people. And my goal in the next 5 years is genuinely just to get these, I'm trying to think of the right word, like entities, these groups of people, they all think that they're in competition, but genuinely, if we're all here to help people, if you work in the mental health field, if you're working peer support, that means you're trying to help people. You want people to get better. And I want to get like conferences and these things moving less framed as a professional thing and more framed as a personal attendance, when I get good show up, most of the good attendance I get from any interactions is because the people aren't just, they happen to have a job that overlaps with the thing they care about. And so I want to find a way to get people who actually care about this stuff to join these tough jobs, to go be a peer support specialist or run a crisis team in your area, do the stuff that's really hard. And then, like, cheesy word, but it's like literally a family thing. Like getting my crisis team, we all are literally paid. Everybody is like professionally, we're the crisis response team. So it's like when the cops are called because the guy has a gun to his head or whatever, they don't just want cops there. They want someone there who's trying to talk them down. It's that crisis response network of people. I don't want us to just refer to us as a team or whatever. We're all the people genuinely showing up when there's a crisis going on. We actually care about these people. You know, like you can't pay us enough for this job to be worth it. It's a shitty job to run a crisis. And I'm trying to just change that frame. I've only found one person even knows the problem I'm talking about right now, and that's Greg Henriquez, the guy that Vervaeke's done a couple things on. He has like Untangling the World Knot series. He talks about the problem of psychology, where it's like he's a therapist and he's training this, he's this person's therapist and he's training this person and trying to help this person have a better connection with their life, be more intimate, be real, grounded in their life. But if he's in the grocery store and he sees them, he has to act like a robot, like he doesn't know them. And he's like, that's completely backwards. Like, if I see my client or whatever, and I'm their therapist, I see you at the store and you're having a good day, I should be elated and be able to like share that you're out of your house. I know how difficult it can be for you to get out of your house, and here you are. I should be able to treat you like a person and not like a client. And so I see that's what I want to aim at, is like personhood should be prioritized over client, over addiction, over party line, over all these things. And we're going to have to just host weird events like the one up in Thunder Bay or wherever and get people who have no business being near each other all together. Like, and that's my goal lately. And very much in the next 5 years is just to prioritize people genuinely knowing each other and not just being like, oh, he works there, or oh,
So
they do this.
that's interesting, because I listened to this podcast, This Jungian Life, which is I advise that to everybody if they want to learn to think more in Jungian terms. But they're also therapists, and they were also having a story about like meeting someone in real life, and how that changes the relationship, right? Like it's kind of like you meet the sacred,
yeah,
in the plane, and that disenchants in some way, right?
Oh man, if I could go back to one person that I've only met once in my life that had the biggest influence on me, I got to watch the movie Pi, Aronofsky movie. Very intense. Like if you have never seen the movie Pi, it is for people like you and me who are like stuck in their head. He's a Jewish mathematician. He wants to find the pattern of pi. That's the story. So, but it's a very trippy movie. It's an Aronofsky movie. But I did this long flight and I sat next to this woman, and like of all the things she could have put on, she put on that movie, and I watched it next to this lady. I have this, like, if I met her and I could know it was her and I would hug like right away. We completely clicked. It was a plane flight. Literally, like, I've had a lot of plane flights. That's not the normal thing if you've never been on a plane, but it's like that level of connection I had with this person with this one thing. And it's like, we're never going to be able to meet each other. There's no way I have her name. I was a kid. I was just separated. My parents were like cool with her. And I sat up there and my parents were in the back so they could sit next to each other. And like, anyways, I would do anything to have more of those moments, because that, like, the level of intimacy, like her explaining what she got out of that movie, and this level of connection I had with this lady, I was just sitting on a plane ride next to her. or whatever. And then a conversation at the grocery store or something can really shake someone. Like I've seen someone who's unbelievably bad mood, like depressed to the point where they're getting vengeful, and they happen to be friends with my niece, and not friends but classmates with in a conjunction acquaintance with my niece. And I just asked my niece, who's she has like snake bites, she's all tatted up. My niece looks like she'll hurt you, and she will. Um, and I asked her, just be nice to this guy. Hey, could you do me a favor and just be nice to this kid? Like when you see him, just smile, just be a big smile. And like 2-3 years later, he came to us and like came to her and let her know that she stopped him from killing himself one day. Like he was going to go kill himself because nobody cared. And that was the day when he looked up. My niece happened to see him. She just gave him a big smile. That's it. She didn't say hi, nothing, just a big smile from this guy that they have to bump into each other, how their lives coordinate. They have no reason. They don't really know each other. But he said that literally saved his life. Now he's friends with my niece and stuff. But it's like very interesting how those little moments can have such reverberations, and they're just the stupidest, it seems so inconsequential. It's a thing that's been done so many times. How many plane flights go on where nothing happens? Most of them. So I would do anything to open up that connection with people and let them remember there's going to be a point with anybody that you're going to disagree, no matter who they are, no matter how close you are. There's the point where there's going to be that thing
I
that's
disagree.
but so what? Exactly. There's so much more important than that. And so thanks. But that's my point though, is there's so much more than that matters than that disagreement. Even if we disagree about that thing, it's like, okay, well, we can move on and come back to it later. Like that's not the point.
Well, I had actually with Mark, I had a different strategy, right? So it wasn't so much disagreement, right? Because okay, this goes into humility, right? You have to be aware of what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you tell yourself you know something you don't, and you're going to get into disagreements or whatever, right? That's going to be massive, right? So I and Mark had these subjects, right? We called them dragons of the apocalypse, right? And it's like, for example, relevance realization, right? Like relevance realization, like if you want to figure that out, like what that is, right? Like we kind of got a sense of it now, right? But it's still like super fuzzy and
it's big.
right.
It's his
And
entire life work. Yeah.
So if you wanna tackle that while you're not ready, you're gonna get into some quagmire, right? But what we said, no, it's a dragon, right? Like there's maybe a pot of gold behind the dragon, but like I'm not gonna fight that dragon because like I don't have to, and it's a dragon. Like don't fight the dragon. Like I'll fight some lizard somewhere else. So like I'll leave the dragon for what it is, and so so you having that humility and say, well, like no, like I'm not ready, like that's too big for me.
Yep.
And you can avoid a lot of conflicts when you take a position of humility. Like a lot of women, right? Like they often they have this thing that they need to work out, right? And then there's a question, right? Like, are you going to accept the frame that's offered to you from the guy, right? Like they say it works like this, or are you going to rebel and be stubborn and have to work it out yourself, right? Now I can tell you that when you listen to the guy, like maybe 1 in 10 times, the guy's going to be wrong or whatever, or is going to be insufficient, right? But that means that you're going to get it right 9 times out of 10. And like what's your own success rate, right? And like how much burden do you get on yourself when you're working it through yourself? And what does that require? Well, that requires commitments, right? And it requires you to come from a place of humility, right? Like, I don't know, help me, right? But if you're not coming from that place, right, and you're going to work it out yourself, you're going to end up in conflict, right? Especially if the guy thinks he knows. So, and this is submittance, right? Like, and what are you trying to do, right? Like why is it important that you're in the conflict? Like, it's like, why is it important that you figure this out? Like, people need to rethink these relationships for themselves, and they need to step out of the individuals. I literally, after my meditation, I tell myself to stop thinking all the time. Like, when I notice that I'm going into a thought pattern and I can't justify it to myself, I'm just stopping. Like, it's like why am I trying to figure out what the price of this should be, or whether I should buy this or not? Like, either I am intending to buy it or I'm not, right? Like I don't have to figure it out. So I don't know where I'm going with this. But oh yeah, so it's the humility, right? Like, it's again the place from which you're engaging. What's the ground that you're standing on? So I will also.
Now, the word that's popping in my head right now is because you said submission. I'm thinking what goes with that, or what's required to balance that submission, is admission. And admission, I kind of looked it up just to make sure my brain was really tracking. It does have this like interesting dual meaning right here, where it's basically, one is a statement, like a proposition of an admission of guilt or an acknowledgement, right? That's one sense of admission. But there's also admission as in to be allowed to enter. And so it's like that submission, to submit to something would also mean that you'd have to admit that it is above. To submit would mean you're under. That would logically imply that the thing that you're going under would then be above. But
Well, yeah, I would frame it differently, right? So the submission is to a body, right? So you put the body above you,
okay,
right? But the admission is you become part of the body, right? So your mission becomes part of the mission of the body, right? So the body has responsibility towards
yeah, because you're part of it now. Yeah, you've
right.
been admitted in.
Right. And that's the basis for the trust, right? Like,
Yeah.
so the fact that your mission is incorporated. Yeah, that's real beautiful. I like that.
Which is weird. When you said the submission one time, it actually clicked, where it's like, what that would, that's a proper transaction. That's not a
Dirty word.
yeah, it's not a dirty word transaction. It's more of, it's, yeah.
Well, yeah, but people can't even look at that word in some sense, right? And then
Well, yeah. Why am I not admitted? Why can't I come in? And it's like, well, I'm sorry. It's, you can come in, but you need to work for it.
well, yeah, you need to submit, right? Like,
you have to submit to get me admitted.
Yeah.
I can't just admit you because you declared that you want in. That's not how this works.
Right. No, and I think there's a primacy to the submission, right? And then the admission is coming as grace in some sense, right?
Yeah.
Like that,
yeah. Yeah, because you want to be if you're submitting to something evil, you're not going to be admitted into it. It's just going to use you and discard you. It's not going to incorporate you and grow you and bring you into it. It's going to just, so. Yeah, I like little technical words. So that one really, like, I was thinking humility a lot, but that one, now that I can see where it would structure and why, especially that I see, now that I can really see, basically, Lori Paul's transformative growth argument, you can't see where you're going to transform to from where you are. And so if all I see is punishment and stuff, I don't know what reward is. How would that incentive doesn't even doesn't go into the calculation at all. So it's just very interesting to see that all
Right,
move
and
out
that's why
through.
you need a Torah. Right,
Mhm.
that's why you need a chaperone, and that's why you need to submit.
Yeah,
Right,
but then
like
but then to remember that it's so easy right now to submit to the wrong thing though, that I think that's also another scary is people don't want to submit to anything because they feel like anything they submit to won't be the highest. And it's like, well, maybe it's moving you towards it. If it's just even moving you towards something that's going up, that's good enough. Like it's very unlikely you're going to find the correct, but even if it's helping you towards it, I think it's worth it. So
yeah, well, no, that is a difficult question. Like I don't have the answer because
mm-mm.
I things like and I know that there's better versions of this, but internal family systems, right?
Yeah,
That that's like polytheism in some sense, right? It's like
it's how I can't help but map it that way because now that I've seen that the way our culture has set it up is antithetical to the basic of the family politic of it was
oh
normal
yeah,
for
and
you
if
to
you
be
don't know
in
what a
relationship.
family is and how a family is
Then
supposed to
how can you
function,
even,
yeah,
yeah,
like what? Oh my, I didn't even
exactly.
think of that, but like that's
Exactly. That's so genius. That's what I meant by the self thing. It's like you're so intimate with it, but it's completely out of grasp. So here you are wanting to relate to this thing that you've terminated what that means. You've completely disenchanted this term, and then you said this is what I want to be, and it's like, well, you're gonna
yeah,
you're
and
completely,
yeah, you don't have the relationship, so yeah. Oh my God, oh,
yeah.
that's just
So
horrible.
well, that's great to see that you and I have managed to get out of that loop, not ourselves out of that loop, but something has caught us up out of that loop. It can't all be calculated. If it was all calculated, you and I would have never been able to, whatever that was.
Well, I calculated that I couldn't calculate it.
Yeah, well, the calculations prove that you can't, so you won't go forward. Yeah. That's why I like Gödel's incompleteness theorem so much, is it's like any system that's complete has to have inconsistencies. There's a trade-off. You're either complete or consistent. You can't be both. And that's so difficult, but that's the truth. It's like
Well,
maybe God can be the only one
well,
that's consistent and complete.
so this is interesting, right? So what if multiple personalities are ways to maintain consistency, but within a separate arena?
Yeah, yeah. Sybil would be the perfect example. She was a very high functioning kindergarten teacher who had multiple complete different personalities. She was like a functioning kindergarten teacher until she had her breakdown in front of the class. And that's when we found out about Sybil, who's like one of the architect of an actual mental, she had multiple lives. It's not like multiple views of her life or multiple perspectives of her life. No, she had multiple lives. That's terrifying because you can't genuinely prove that you don't. Like,
Well, yeah, there's something to that, right? Like women put on their face when they go out. Like that's an actual expression.
yeah. Well, I'm glad my wife doesn't wear makeup, but most women, yes, exactly,
Right,
100%.
but like in some sense that is good. Like I actually saw this on Tinder. It's like my makeup is my Zen moment. And I was like, yes, that's right relationship.
Ah!
Your makeup, right? Like have that meditative experience every day. But it's also a transition, right? So like people used to change clothes for dinner and then right. So there is something in appropriating the right relationship, right? And I think that's what prayer is for for dinner as well. It's like, oh, we're switching containers. We're getting out
Yeah.
of this one into the next one.
I have a great example for that. Why I dress like a bum all the time. So like I'm called to dress up a lot. and I pretty much don't, except for funerals and very specific things. And that dressing up, one of my favorite studies was when I do crisis intervention teams for police. We'll show them that when they're putting on their uniform, if I have a heart rate monitor on them, they'll usually go up about 15 beats a minute. Just putting on their uniform, like putting on your bulletproof vest, putting on your belt, putting on your gun, your body is just like getting ready. It's proper. And then someone like me, I literally like don't get out of my flip-flops unless I have to. And it's because I was raised around all those very high register people, and I love being the opposite. I also get hyphy and can go past them in insanity of like intensity, but I've noticed that trick. I really don't like dressing up for church or anything, because like if I'm wearing a suit in church, that's military attire. My brain knows that. I can't not think military attire.
Well, but you're an army of God, dude. Like,
I get it, but it's like he's called me to be sacrificed, not to be. So I'm like, I get it though. It's like that confliction, and we were talking about participating. I mean, at the Orthodox Church, they Mary of Egypt. It's an intense story for how it's a part of my life. And when everybody came to kiss the icon, I couldn't. I just couldn't kiss the icon. I didn't even move. I just like stood there, and I like prayed, and I know if she could hear, like, I am not meaning disrespect to you, but I genuinely can't. It's too real. It's not that I
big
don't
dog head
believe or
up,
that
man, dude.
I don't know how to. I don't know how to move that. You know, I just did a 3.5 hour service. There's only 6 of us in here. They all noticed that I didn't get up,
Mhm.
but I couldn't. It's like if
Were
I got
you
up, it would be
afraid of the
performing for them.
intimacy?
Well, I don't know what it was. It was like one of the weirdest things, because it wasn't like I cared about their perspective. Because for a moment, I almost got up to save face for them. Like, well, everybody was doing it. And then I was like, well, I can't.
Yeah,
I just
but
can't.
are you afraid of the intimacy with Mary?
Yeah, it was Mary of Egypt. Her story
Oh, okay,
is
it was a different Mary.
extremely rough. Like
Mhm.
Mary of Egypt has a rough go of it. And with the women I work with, and like it's too real for me. How she was sexually abused, all this stuff. Even when she's trying to get to Jerusalem, she has nothing to trade. So she offers one of the Christian ships her body in exchange, and they have to decline her, and they can't even bring her on the ship because she would tempt them. So they want her to come. They're like, please try to come, but we can't bring you on the ship because not all of us are strong enough to tell you no. Right. And so she gets her way to Jerusalem by selling her body to an like the Mary of Egypt's story is so real for someone like me who literally works domestic violence and stuff, that I just was like, yo, there's nothing new under the sun. If I brought like the last 3 domestic violence women I know and had them sit in this church for 3 hours and go through the whole liturgy, I'm pretty sure it'd rock them too much. It'd be way too much. It's just like way too much for a normal person, much less when he has to actually live that life. And yeah, it was just like too real. It was like a very strange moment for me where I was like very conflicted of like, I know that's real. I know everything I was just told is real. None of that was made up. I know that more than anything. Like how the story's told. I mean, it's basically even the recordings of Mary of Egypt. No one wrote down that story for a long, long time because nobody knew about it except for the people at the place where it took place. They had no reason to write it down. They all just shared the story. Someone came in from outside, heard that story, and was so amazed. He was like, please let me write this down and share it with the rest of Christianity. And that's why we got her story. But it's like, upon hearing the end, it's either they made all that up, like it's perfectly rational that all of that story is bullshit. Like I can say that, like it's perfectly rational if you go through it. Oh, that's just a really good story to sell Christianity. Yeah, if you had a prostitute, you told her that, she'd become a Christian. But it's also like I don't think anybody could make that up. I genuinely think it's real. It's like telling me someone made up the story of Christ. It's like, how? Who's smart enough to like?
Well, like,
It's
does it matter
impossible.
at that point? Then they're Christ, right?
It's like the contingent, but it's real. Like it couldn't have been fake because like how many contingent things there are. All of reality breaks down if somehow that's not real. And I had that epiphany in my like sitting in a church and just being like, oh no, I actually think this is all real. Like that's really scary. Because I pray to Saint Ignatius, who's the guy who was fed to lions at a Colosseum. Like that's who I'm praying to be like. What's wrong with us? Like something is wrong with us. Like why would I think this guy's right. How did his story end? He was eaten by lions. Like, yep, he's my hero. Okay, what? Like, yeah. So I don't. Something can't be. It can't be contingent or made up or something. Feels like it has to be real to me. So that's why those little moments. I'm hoping in the future people can recognize those moments that they know is real, and you can let them go by. And I really hope we can start. More people will stop letting those moments go by. You know, you don't have to participate in them, but you're called to. And I'm hoping more people, when they hear that calling to participate in that moment that you can't plan, that you just do it. Just take it. It's gonna be worth it. Might kill you, but it'll still be worth it. Like
Wait, can you give that a little bit more flesh? Like you mean
yeah, I
the
mean,
moment that you can choose to face alliance? Is that what
yeah, I
you're
mean, well,
talking
oh, that's
about?
probably more dire, but I mean that moment where um you're realizing that this is real. You can keep it in the you can keep this life you're living as like a dream. Like it's just another instance I'm loading into in a video game and it's just gonna fade. I don't have to really care about it. Or I think those little moments come up and you have like a weird conversation. There are certain memories, like I drove across country recently and like while driving across Texas, I like looked at I was hungry. So I like looked up local place in this little town I was in driving through. Where's the best place to eat? And I went there. And as I was like pulling in, I was like, this is the best place in this town. Like that review I read is a real review from someone who loves to eat here. Cause I could just feel it felt good. And like I had a great conversation with the person there. Like the lady running the place. I let him know my wife has like a food cart and I run a thing. And I just opened up on a conversation to have this really great conversation with them. And it almost didn't happen. What was going through my mind right before I got like way personal and just like spilled my beans to this person because there's no one else eating. He's sitting there chopping meat, and I could tell I like came right at the lull. There's usually a bunch of people here, and I'm here alone in his restaurant, and there's just this dude chopping his barbecue. And I'm like, started the conversation. It was just an amazing, amazing conversation I had with that guy. But I had that, I could remember still this moment and recalling it where I had to like argue with myself to even initiate it, you know? Like I could just let this slide. I'm sure this guy would like to talk, but he's busy right now. He's chopping meat. He just wants to work. No, he doesn't just want to work. He wants to work and feed people and have be part of this world. And he's feeding me. I just drove from Arizona. I'm in Texas right now to see my great aunt. I'm about
Well, he
to eat
wants to
his
have
food.
pride in what he's doing, right? Like he wants to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good pride. Yeah, he should have pride in it. It was very good food. I felt great after eating it. I like, and that
Well,
little moment telling people good job, like actually encouraging them.
wait. Maybe we should rephrase that. He wants to participate in the glory of what he's manifesting. There we go.
There you go. Yeah. If you're going to go in the Christian, that's exactly right. The glory though, because I mean, it's just barbecue, but here I am of all the barbecue stops. So I chose this one and it was like, I just read the Google review and it looked like some teenager kid was like, right. He's like, this is where I go for my lunch break. And I like to meet my dad there because he gets his lunch break the same time sometimes. Like that was the comment I read where I was like, this is the one I want to go to. If the kid doesn't get to eat with his dad very often and where they meet for lunch is this place, probably has good vibes. And it's like Lay's potato chips on like a, the thing. You have to like pinch the little thing to get your own bag of chips, and you go open in the thing and get your own Coke. Like it's a hole in the wall barbecue place, but it was like much better than going to McDonald's or going to I could have gotten a much more efficient, cheaper meal at all the other restaurants, and it would have not given me that great conversation, that great moment of connecting with this guy, hearing about why he decided to do what he's doing. COVID started. He had been a sous chef, and the restaurant fired him instead of keeping him. And he's like, I'd given them, decades of my life. The moment they didn't need to pay my check, they stopped paying. And so I went on my own, and I was like, see, that's I had this like very intense conversation with someone that I'll never probably see again. And I'll shout out, he's somewhere in Texas, whatever. It's like, we need to foster those moments in all of life, like everywhere. They're not going to be planned. You can't schedule them very easily, but there's going to be those things. And I think we need to take the time to appreciate those moments at the diner, at the wherever you're at.
So
that's the transfer.
I went to a fancy restaurant with my family, and there was this person that said, well, like, now you're going to have this with this and this. And they had this menu card, and then you could have a wine selection with the menu. You can also have a juice selection. So they had these homemade where they had like pine needles with whatever, like sage and so it was super fancy, right? And so then every course she came and she explained it, right? It's like, well, and then there's this tacky flavor, and it fits with the meat that you're going to eat, right? And we were asking questions, and in the end she said, I was really pleased with you guys being a guest, because we interacted with her, right? We showed genuine interest, and like usually people are just like listening to what she says, and it's like, okay, like fancy food
and that's it. Yep.
And so yeah, like that interaction and
huge. That's it.
Well, but it's also huge that people can appreciate, right? Because there's also people who just don't care because
they don't appreciate.
Right.
I have a friend who, she's a really nice person, and because of an injury, she cannot taste. And so her and I had conversations. We like went to high school and stuff together, and she would get really bummed out that a conversation could go around something she doesn't have, right? We're all saying how good this too, and she doesn't have smell or taste. And it was one of my most eye-opening experiences of my life when my friend Sabrina like laid that on me. Like, why she's a vegetarian and a vegan isn't like ethics and stuff. It's like, I can eat tofu every day because I don't taste anything. Like, I can't smell my food. It doesn't matter how much cinnamon you put on it. It doesn't matter to me unless it's spicy and hurts me. I can't tell. And it's like, that really maps onto what you were saying earlier, how it's not like there's different people. It's just some people do have a higher capacity, and you need to lean on them for these certain things. Now, my friend Sabrina, she's really good at other things. Like, God didn't like forsake her, but like she does get bummed out when she sees like everybody pleasing her. They go, she doesn't have smell. She can't smell anything.
But she could participate.
Oh, she does. She's a great host. No, but her house parties are awesome.
No, but she can participate in the communion, right? Like, so you can have two reactions, right? You can have a jaded, is it jaded reaction, right? Like where it's like, oh, I'm missing this, or it's like, oh no, I can still see them enjoy it, and through their enjoyment, I can partake.
Yep.
And that is really hard, right? Because that's where you have to face all your demons and be okay with what is.
Yeah, she's a rather tough cookie, my friend Serena, who I'm talking about, because she was someone else who worked at a martial arts studio. So her and I both had keys to like a different dojo. And there's everybody else thinking they're cool, and it's like, I can literally like open up a martial arts studio filled with weapons and like I know the security code. So we were just on our own wavelength, but it was very much that, because she's come to think of it, like her parties and stuff were great. She didn't care what was being served as long as everybody is going to eat it. Like, she's a great host because she didn't have much taste. It's like a very weird.
No,
Huh.
no, no, but that's true, right? And
Mhm.
because she doesn't need to sacrifice something that other
Nope, it's
people
not a
need to
sacrifice for her.
sacrifice. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's why you need to willingly sacrifice, like so that you can make the sacrifice when it's required. And yeah,
Hmm.
no, like this is some good stuff. Like yeah, let's point a little bit towards the future so that we can still have pretend
Yeah.
that we had structure.
Well, yeah. Well, no. Towards the future is definitely. I mean, now what I'm thinking is basically what I want to do is find a way for humans to be okay with doing house parties and stuff again. Like
Mhm.
just meeting up for the sake of meeting up so you can meet my strange friend. Why do I want you two to meet? Because you've never met before and you both know me. So I'd like you two to meet. And maybe you're not going to be friends or anything, but we're going to have a great conversation and this dinner party is going to go fun because that weird dynamic of people. So I think that's kind of what I want to host. I mean, my wife and I literally do a soup kitchen every night, and that is the idea. My wife was upset that there was no place for hungry people to eat in my community. And so that just irked her. She wrote that down. And like 2 or 3 years later, the world warped where that opportunity was given to us. And so we took it. And I think that that's generally what we need to do is run house parties, run a conference that's as basic as consciousness. Could you get a topic more broad? Like there's not, like, it's like the most
Let's all
broad thing
talk
ever.
about the same thing. Oh wait.
Hey, it's impossible. Like that's exactly the idea of us. So I think that's if we can get that comfort level, less formality and more real intimacy though, because like the formality can kind of kill the.
Well, but that's the
You
divine
need
feminine,
enough.
right?
Yeah,
Like
you need enough, but not too much.
well, that's been the theme of my videos lately. So you're gonna be on the end of the sequence, but yeah, no, that's what we're converging on, right? Like there, and so I don't like to do this, and now it's gonna be on the internet, but I do think that the responsibility is on the women because they set the table,
I
literally.
did you see Catherine's talk? I only watched the first like 10 minutes of the newest video where they're doing a little recap.
Yeah, yeah,
It's Nick and
yeah.
them.
No, like
She's when
she's
she said
doing it.
that, I wanted to send that to my wife. That's what my wife is doing, more or less. My wife has very little interest in all this talky stuff, but she makes the space possible. Like the only reason I'm here is because my wife has provided that. So yeah, more than true. It's like completely necessary, and we should find a way to
Well,
be thankful for it.
she
Because
she actually has committed to come on the show during this conversation. So
oh wow, all right.
yes, that's gonna
So,
happen.
well, that's definitely a good place to have the conversation go towards because that's so cool that she flat out said that that was her goal, and I think that's to be hospitable and
Mhm.
like that's so taken. So I like when Vervaeke brought up the word hubris recently because that's the opposite of hospitality is that hubris, and that's what I see is our society is very hubristic lately. Not thankful for just how much sacrifice has gone into where we
Mhm.
are now.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
A- and
something you can't have if you have a woman near you.
and not appreciated, right?
Hmm.
And that's because we masculinized everything and and well no but if the women don't believe in themselves, how are the men supposed to believe in the women?
Yeah. Yeah. The most powerful thing my wife gives me is encouragement. Like when my wife tells me I'm an idiot or something, it like just I'm ruined. But when my wife is like the smallest little bit of encouragement from her outweighs anything anybody else can say. Like I don't care about anybody's compliments or anything, so long as my wife says like
But
she's
you're
happy with me or
amazing,
not.
Skyler.
So, well, what's his name? Tip does that very well. I wish I could compliment people that well. If I could pick up something from Tip, I want to be able to better compliment people just like that. That's a good skill to have. I can make fun of people that quick. That's easy. Why can I do with the
Look at you
insults,
being
but
excited.
not the?
Ooh, pumping up the energy. I like it.
So,
Now you're
yeah.
red. Great.
Yeah. Well, the thing about my wife knows how to
this is the
harass me,
awkward
man.
that I was talking about.
Yeah,
Like,
it's good. It's good to have
being
awkward, man. Yeah.
Um,
So I'm really glad that I finally just sat down and talked to you with this. Good.
okay, so let's make it put it to a close. Maybe we could
All right.
have some more conversations, but then not in this format. But
Yeah.
so yeah, like is there a lesson that you're drawing from?
Well, no, it's just I can finally kind of click some of the bigger picture, some of the beefs you guys have tried to articulate make a lot more sense to me, especially the framing of why putting things as in a cost for failure, that type of modality of explaining things. Maybe it is very good to come at it, maybe explicating the same structure, but from such a different vantage that you don't have to
But
express
then you
those
have to justify
traps.
this, right? Because the negative is a self-justification, right? Oh, just move away from the bad. That's Sam Harris. It's like, yeah, but
Yeah, we might move towards worse.
yeah.
You don't know where good is. You can't just move away towards bad. You have to move towards good to get away from bad. So that makes a lot more sense now that I can articulate why that would have been a thing that irked you, because I just genuinely
Well,
didn't
I
see
also
like
think it's evil, right?
it. Yeah, no, that genuinely I see it, because now when you're in that perspective of not having access to reward, any incentive for betterment, there it's
And
torturous
this
to tell someone that. It's
right, and
mean.
this is Nishitani's point, right? Like you need to move through nihilism, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, no, fuck you. Like, no, don't move through nihilism. Like there's gonna be a whole lot of holes that are way bigger, and maybe you're amazing, Nishitani. Like you're Buddha 2.0, but all the
Maybe you
other
got
people that
lucky.
get stuck in the holes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there you go. Maybe that's the beef with most people explaining the view from nowhere, because yeah, that if you take one false step getting there, man, you can get stuck there forever. You can like put yourself.
Oh yeah, you can
Well, I'm
just
glad
make
that
it
there's
end,
grace.
right?
I'm glad that we can't figure out the system all the way, and that there's grace, and that sometimes we can just be taken out. So
Well, yeah.
thank you for
Well,
talking.
that's mystery, right? Like
Mhm.
mystery is the dragon of the apocalypse that you can drag
Ah,
with
yeah,
that.
yeah. I think I'll take on one of them, but I'm not going to take on a bunch of those dragons. I'll aim at one.
Oh yeah, because you're stubborn, Mr.
Yes,
Knight.
I cannot help myself.
Okay, so I want to invite everybody who's still been able to maintain watching through all of these hours to share their takeaway and hopefully enlighten Skyler into more perspectives or even me, because that would be amazing. And yeah, Skyler, thank you for being an awesome guest. I think we kind of broke the format, but I hope it was all for good. And see you guys on the next time of Unfolding the Soul.